Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
One, two, three, four. We are missing. We don't have one, two, three, four. Yes, we have a quorum.
Mm-hmm.
So we,
With quorum, 5 or 4.
counting me, we're 5. I'm going to hold off another minute. Hey, Al.
Hello.
So we're getting closer. We're missing Terry and Ben. All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Are we being
recording in progress?
Okay, good evening, everybody. This is the January 24th, 2002 regular meeting of the Mansfield Town Council. The first order of business is a roll call. That's Ms. Shane?
Yes, Osberger.
Here.
Berthelot. Bruder. Coleman. I see Mr. Coleman.
Here.
Fertoni.
Here.
Kotchenberger.
Here.
Moran.
Here.
Shuren.
Here.
Shaken.
Mr. Shaken's having a technical problem. He'll join us soon.
Thank you.
And here comes Ms. Berthelot. All right. Is there anybody here from the public to address the council, Mr. Aylesworth?
I'm not aware of any members of the public to address the council, Madam Mayor.
All right. I see some unfamiliar names on the bottom of the screen. Are any of them members of the public?
I believe the names you're seeing, for instance, Dave Kapleski, are members of the fire department that are playing a role in the presentation this evening.
Okay. Next opportunity is for the report of the town manager, Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Have some updates on the COVID front that I'll roll into the discussion with Mr. Miller in a little bit. Thank you to you all for providing your personal preferences and availability for the special meeting that we're trying to schedule for a focused council discussion around ARPA funding options and investments. May need to give this a second look because the date and time that appeared to work for most everybody, that was February 7th, Monday, February 7th at 7 o'clock, has a direct conflict with the Planning and Zoning Commission. And why that's relevant is we can only live stream one Board or Commission meeting at a time. So if deference was given to the Planning and Zoning Commission to have its meeting, that would mean the council would have to provide a different means for public involvement, i.e. Calling in. And of course, the video can be made available after the fact, but going to look at potentially some alternative dates. So check your inboxes for a follow-up email from myself with the Doodle scheduler to see if some other dates and times that don't present a conflict would work for everybody. But look forward to having that opportunity to discuss what's obviously a very important topic with the council. I think everybody in the council is aware. UConn recently announced, put out a message that Dr. Aguinobi, who has been serving as the interim president of the university, is stepping down to accept a position in the private sector. This came as a bit of a shock or a surprise, and I think what I would characterize as discouraging news for folks involved on the town side in these ongoing discussions we're having with UConn in terms of this, in particular, the shared framework for economic development we've been working on with officials from UConn. Discouraging in the sense that Dr. Aguinobi has been really personally engaged and has been very supportive of these efforts to, reset the relationship with the town and work on shared goals, identify shared goals. And so this, of course, doesn't mean that work has to stop or will stop. It won't. But there's a transition going on at UConn that could impact the trajectory of exactly where things go, at least in the short term. And Dr. Radenka Merrick is the new interim president, or will be shortly, I should say. And so she has participated in the last couple of meetings, and including our most recent framework meeting, and certainly has shown her own enthusiasm for the work that we have going on in this working group. So I'm optimistic that we'll continue to move the ball forward. It's just, with a little bit of, cautious optimism moving forward that leadership change is taking place and the impacts it'll have on all that's been transpiring over the last several months. Because we've brought it a pretty good distance since the concept was first broached back in the the late summer, early fall. The council's obviously aware of our expressed desire to meet with Connecticut DOT to have further discussions surrounding pedestrian safety improvements in the downtown area, but with a particular eye towards Storrs Road 195 and State Route 275 and South Eagleville Road. As I reported at the last meeting, we had heard back from DOT expressing a desire to meet with us and representatives from UConn to talk about what the concerns are and what we see as potential solutions. And so that meeting has been scheduled for 1 p.m. This Wednesday, and look forward to having that discussion. Obviously, it's a very serious subject matter, especially now with students returning to campus in the next few days. We want to see if we can make some progress and address the concerns that the town has held for quite some time when it comes to pedestrian safety concerns at the various unsignaled or uncontrolled crosswalks on 275 and 195. We have officially started the budget season. We really started it back in December, but I say started it because meetings with department heads have commenced last week and this week. So we're sitting down, we're going over budgets, revenue and expenses, and proposed service improvements and capital improvement requests that departments are offering. And so it'll be a very busy time with a lot of meetings, a lot of analyzing and probing, and if you will, but we're off to a good start and look forward to keeping the council apprised of that process as we move forward. TSKP Studios, the architecture and design firm that we're working with on the municipal facilities needs assessment and programmatic use study. So happens to be the same firm that the town's used for the design of the new elementary school that's being constructed. We had our first series of building walkthroughs. We got through about half the buildings that are the focus of the study. That was back on January 13th. We would have finished our walkthroughs of the buildings, the remaining buildings this past week, but unfortunately we had the inclement weather on Wednesday, in particular the concern about icy road conditions. So that second swath of meetings or building walkthroughs is being rescheduled. But I know TSKP got a lot of value out of our site visits on the 13th, and having an opportunity to walk through the buildings with department heads, the building managers that know their spaces inside and out, and basically ground truth a lot of their initial understanding or assumptions about our existing spaces. So much more to come on that front. Some time ago, I was invited I guess you could say, personally take part, but also have the town of Mansfield take part in what's referred to as the Rural Welcoming Initiative. This is an initiative of Welcoming America, which I'm sure several, if not most, council members are familiar with. I thought it would be a particularly appropriate time, setting aside the fact that I think the goals, names, ideals, the values of the initiative are things that are near and dear to members of the council under any circumstance. I thought it was particularly timely given the work that we're trying to do and continue to try to do with Afghan refugee resettlement efforts in town. And so this will be a several weeks commitment. It'll involve opportunities for ongoing technical assistance and participation in Welcoming America's National Conference. I can certainly share more information with council members as you're interested, but the idea is that rural communities have a lot to offer. People from all walks of life, and certainly, refugees is one example of a community or communities that we want to make sure that we are welcoming and not inadvertently putting up barriers to individuals that would want to come and live in our community. And we want to make it easier for them to find path forward to do that, and make sure that we're being helpful, providing resources to identify everything from housing to jobs to transportation to any number of things. And so I look forward to participating in the program, and we'll keep you all apprised as that moves forward. But had our first meeting last week, and I think it's a great group of people from small towns, smaller towns across the country. And so we happen to be, I think, if I recall, the only community in New England that's doing it this year. A lot of Midwestern communities involved, but should be a really good program, good process to go through. The next issue of the town's bi-monthly newsletter we anticipate will be published on February 1st, so keep your eyes peeled for that. This Wednesday, 6 p.m., this Wednesday evening, January 26th, is the first meeting of the recently spun up reapportionment committee for Region 19. So we're getting the word out that meeting, which was sort of short notice. So we were informed late this past week that the meeting had been scheduled. So we're trying to make sure that all the town's representatives that the town council identified are aware of the meeting. And right now, it actually looks like it's going to be an in-person meeting at E.O. Smith, but that may be subject to change based on the emails I saw floating around. So we'll get confirmation of meeting location out to everybody as soon as possible. Kathy Ward and I spoke a little bit today, and she provided an update on the Board of Education search for a new superintendent. I think the summary is things are proceeding on track and quite smoothly in her estimation. First round interviews with the qualified candidates happened this past week, and they're meeting this week to determine who will be finalists to be invited back for the next round of interviews. And they seem to still be on track, according to Kathy, to have a new superintendent selected and announced next month. And I know it's important for them to have overlap with outgoing superintendent Kelly Lyman to ensure a smooth transition. So I hope for their sake that everything holds true to form and they can stay on their appointed schedule. One item I did not include, I realized after I published the town manager's report that I intended to include, pertains to the construction of the new elementary school. And that is specifically that there have been two public presentations that have been scheduled to provide information to the community about the status of the project and the various elements of the transition that's underway to open the new elementary school. One of those sessions, is taking place at the Mansfield Senior Center. That's going to be next Monday, January 31st at 9:30 a.m. And the other is going to be February 8th at 5:30 in the Buchanan Auditorium of the Public Library. So we'll make sure to advertise those upcoming opportunities, those public presentations, but wanted to make sure to make special mention of it in the council meeting tonight since it was not part of my written report. And I think, so obviously students are coming back this weekend. Presumably life in the downtown area and throughout town is going to start to look a little bit different than it has in the absence of the students during the winter break. And then there's sort of extended closure, if you will, in terms of reopening to students because of the pandemic. But things figure to look a little bit different here in the coming days. And so, actually, one other thing I wanted to make sure to mention, and that was I wanted to pass on a note from the Downtown Partnership. We want to make sure to congratulate those restaurants in Mansfield who were recently recognized by Connecticut Magazine in its quote-unquote Best Restaurants 2022 Reader's Choice Awards. In particular, I won't rattle off all the awards, but Fenton River took home the nod on a few categories. Asian Bistro, Coyote Flacco, and Fresh Fork, as well as Farmer's Cow Cafe and Creamery. So we have about a half dozen restaurants that got special mention and received Reader's Choice Awards, and so that's nothing to sneeze at. So we're very proud of that and hope to build on that success moving forward.
Ms. Berthelot.
Thank you, Mayor. Ryan, thanks for an excellent report as always, and always good to hear all the interesting things happening in town. I noticed in the report, one of the things I care very deeply about was mentioned, and I just was looking for a little bit of clarification, and that's annually from our budget, we give money to local not-for-profits, and I noted that there was a call for applications, and those will go, as I remember, to the Human Services Committee. It looked as if the call had gone out already, and I hadn't seen it anywhere, and I'm wondering how it was being advertised, and more importantly, if we could beef it up some. Obviously, not-for-profits are suffering, and we want to make sure that the call goes out as broadly as possible, particularly in Mansfield.
As far as how that's been advertised and to whom it's been communicated since Pat Schneider, our Human Services Director, happens to be in this particular meeting, rather than rely on my own imperfect recollections. Pat, if you're there, I'd offer you to get there. You go.
Yes, so it has gone out through our regular press releases. It's on the front page of the town website. And it's for past applicants. We usually send it directly to them via email. And that's how we have advertised it at this point.
So if I could, I would really I push you all to do more, that we want more than just past applicants, and we want more than just people who know to go to our website to look for such things. I'm not going to pretend to know the best way to reach the not-for-profits, but it would be nice to see more of a mix in terms of the potential people who would benefit from the money.
So Pat and I and Margaret, our communication specialist, be happy to meet and review options. I'm sure they're reaching everybody.
Sure.
Thank you.
Anybody else have questions of the town manager regarding his report? All right. I was interested to see that the Board of Ed is exploring modernizing the middle school. At some point, it would probably, since that is our building, it would be interesting to know what they're recommending. But obviously, it's premature to ask.
Yeah, there have been some preliminary discussions with the superintendent about that, and then she's definitely aware that having an audience with the council in the near future would make sense.
Okay. All right. Reports and comments of council members. Does anybody have any report or comment? Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, as we were discussing in the personnel committee, I would like to see the minutes as required by the town's rules and procedures starting tonight. I don't feel as we're following the rules and procedures on the minutes for the town meetings. So tonight's
You're specifically referring to a more detailed inclusion of the nature of the discussion around motions.
Yes.
Okay.
Debates and deliberations as well.
All right.
Those that lead to action.
I don't know where we go with that. Are you,
I would
making a
say,
motion?
I'm requesting, yeah, I would move that we follow the rules and the procedures, in accordance, to the minutes, the rules and procedure of the town.
Is Mr. Hatchenberger?
I can look, I haven't looked them up this second, but what specifically are the rules that, Brian, do you think that we're not following with the minutes?
Mr. Coleman, you wish to respond?
Let's see, let me find it here in the rules of procedure. I'll read it.
Before you answer, is there a second to Mr. Coleman's motion? Mr. Ostberger seconds. Okay. Would you care to explain your motion, Mr. Coleman?
Hang on 1 minute. I'm looking for the rule.
If I may, I can cite it.
Mr.
Yes, can you
Sharon?
cite it for me?
This is Rule 2H, which is on page 2 of our Rules of Procedures, that indicate that minutes are to include deliberations, discussions, and actions.
This is not normally a part of the agenda where we entertain motions, but this motion has been made, so I'm going to rule that it is appropriate at this time.
Okay. Ron, that was on page 2.
Page 2.
What letter?
2H.
The town clerk is the clerk council shall, in accordance with the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act, keep for public inspection minutes of all its proceedings, including all roll calls, votes, and indicating deliberations, discussions, and actions which shall be official record of council proceedings. The journal shall be authenticated for each meeting by the signature of the mayor or deputy mayor in the absence of the mayor. Notes for the meeting indicating all actions shall be available to the public within 48 hours of the meeting, and the minutes shall be available and posted on the website 7 days of the meeting. So I move that all town council minutes are required to meet this procedure.
And could you be more explicit? You've already made your motion, it's been seconded. Could you be more explicit what you want in the minutes?
I would like all deliberations and debate included, doesn't have to be verbatim, that lead to action.
All right, Mr. Sharon?
My concern is twofold. One, we have something in our Rules of Procedure, therefore we should give it due deference. Second, we will rely and should rely on the judgment and discretion of the person taking the minutes. Otherwise, we would have verbatim transcripts, and that's not what we want. So I think we should be clear that if this policy were to be pursued and adopted, what we're talking about is concise explanation of the basis of discussion and action. I do know that there is concern that the minutes could then become transcripts, and that's not what we want. And I also am concerned that we're putting a burden on our staff in determining what goes into the minutes and what does not. I will point out that, of course, minutes can be amended when they are presented to the council. But this is something that requires very careful consideration, and I would like to see it outlined more clearly. So for that reason, this evening, I will not support this motion.
Mr. Shaken? Mr. Shaken, we can't hear you.
How about now?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. So I'm inclined to agree to some extent with Ron, at least about the conclusion that he's reached at the end of this. And just to go over a little bit of the history here, the minutes have at times, in my time on the council, included sort of short summaries of some of the discussion, and there have been in the past councilors who've pretty vehemently disputed the characterization of their remarks and had to sort of have consistent debates about whether they actually said something that they said or whether it was characterized correctly. My understanding of what these rules say is a little different, frankly, than I think the minutes as they've been presented and maybe as they've evolved into being. But I don't believe that our minutes should include a summary of the points that were raised for and against a particular motion. There's a recording of this meeting, and people who wish to delve in to detail about what was said at a council meeting should watch our debate, because the best way to characterize what folks said is to listen to what folks said. My experience with minutes that summarize things in accordance with Robert's rules, which I think is how our rules are set out, is that they essentially would say, in this particular case, Brian made a motion, Charlie seconded it, Ron, Ben, and Brian discussed the motion, then the council voted, rather than summarizing the particulars of each of our points during the debate. And so I think if we added those things to our minutes, that would be what I would consider to be the as far as our rules and as Robert's rules ever would require minutes of a meeting to be. And certainly as far as I've ever seen Robert's rules summarize meetings in instances when they're being prepared for official sort of government use, which is probably different perhaps than some counselors' experiences with Robert's rules and other more private venues. However, the way that this motion is worded is that Brian has made a motion to compel the council to follow its own rules. I think the council is following its own rules only to the extent to which this has been brought up in the past and the mayor has ruled that this is how the rules should be interpreted. And so there could be a motion to overturn the mayor's interpretation of the rules, but I'm not comfortable voting in favor of something that says we must follow our rules, or frankly, voting against something that says we must follow our rules when I think we are already following them. So if there needs to be more of a prescriptive process laid out in our rules, then the personnel committee should review the rules as we asked them to do 2 months ago and make recommendations to us about any changes to them. And we do that at the beginning of every council term pretty much. And I think we did it again at the beginning of this one. But absent that, I think we are currently following the rules as the mayor has interpreted them in many public forums before. And I would ask my colleagues to oppose the motion.
Mr. Shuren?
Yeah, I just pointed, the Personnel Committee did review, this is how this issue arose this evening. I am on the side of favoring a bit more in terms of giving historical record in the printed minutes, but this is something that I would like the Personnel Committee to discuss in greater detail. And for that reason, this evening, I don't think this particular resolution is appropriate and will oppose it.
I'll withdraw the motion and send it to the Personnel Committee for review.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Osberger?
Would posit this to Ron. Is it not a transcription because we are recording?
Recording is available, thus I suppose one could interpret that as a transcription. It's available for 1 year.
Mr. Coleman?
I'm leaning on the side of being transparent. I think this town is a pretty transparent town, and I have seen the minutes change in their content over the years. They seem to be a little less detailed, especially when it comes to debates on motions. Also, 1 year recording. I look at minutes that are a decade old or even more. I like to have something to refer to. And when I refer to it, I like to see, some content and actually be able to go back and see what was discussed in the emotion.
Well, you have withdrawn your motion. There will be, and it's gone back to personnel. And I am certain that we will have this brought forward as part of a personnel committee report at a later date. Are there any further comments or reports from council members?
Mayor, just a point of procedure. I believe Mr. Osberger needs to withdraw his second.
Mr. Osberger, are you willing to withdraw your second?
I am, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Shaken serves as my parliamentarian on occasion, and I'm grateful. Any other comments from council members? Okay, then the next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. The consent agenda includes draft minutes from our January 10th meeting, appointments to town committees, a budget review calendar, and proposed salary budget transfers, which is a motion that has come out of the Finance Committee. Mr. Shuren?
I move adoption of the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Mr. Kotchenberger seconds. Does anybody wish to vote in opposition to the consent agenda? Hearing none, I rule that it has been adopted unanimously. Next item is a COVID-19 update. Mr. Aylesworth and Mr. Miller.
Happy to yield the floor to Mr. Miller to start.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I'll start off with some COVID numbers as usual. This for the week ending January 15th, the health district experienced a total case count of 524 cases. For the town of Mansfield during that same period, it was 99 cases. And while this number is extremely high, it's actually a decrease from the previous week, which was 725 cases, which to date is the most that we've ever observed during the course of this pandemic. The Mansfield positivity rate as of January 15th was 27%. And its case rate, again, as of the 15th, was 75 cases per 100,000. I do at this time want to point out that these numbers are actually, the numbers available to local health departments are available on a weekly basis, and we get them every Thursday, and those numbers are even a week old themselves. And based on the timing of these numbers, I took an updated look at today's numbers statewide. While they weren't available on a townwide basis, I think it's important to note that the positivity rate for the state of Connecticut is, as of today, is currently at 11.36%. And I suspect that Mansfield's positivity rate also has come down since that January 15th numbers that I just reported out. And then likewise, hospitalizations as of January 12th were at statewide were at 1,917. They've come down almost 450 cases or hospitalizations since then. As of today, they were 1,477. So those are two recent measures of statewide population, which indicate that there is a decline in the prevalence and of more severe outcomes within the population. That being said, both of those numbers are still extremely high, and it remains to be seen, how robust this decline will be in the coming weeks. We're hopeful that it will be robust. In terms of vaccinations, we continue to inch up very small increments from 1 week to the next. There really hasn't been a substantial change from the last time I reported out to this body a couple of weeks ago in terms of vaccine coverage among both the health district population and the town of Mansfield population. The town does continue to remain, I think, well above the curve compared to the statewide numbers. Just by way of example, fully populated percentage of fully vaccinated percent of population in Mansfield's at 81%, and Connecticut's at 72%. The health district does continue to provide the weekly vaccine clinics, Mondays for adults and Thursdays for the kids at the Mansfield Town Hall. I think it's also important to point out, you've probably heard these numbers, but I think it's worth repeating. Worth repeating in an effort to kind of continue to get the message out there that vaccine's an important tool for protecting yourselves, your family, and the community. And with that said, 5.3% of those who are fully vaccinated have contracted COVID-19. So based on that number alone, you can see that being vaccinated is protective. And that number hasn't been particularly available in the past. It was just recently, say a couple months ago, I believe, that the state started reconciling two data sets that they had at their disposal. One being the data set reporting out positive laboratory confirmed cases, and they're comparing those or cross-referencing those to the data set which identifies everybody who's been vaccinated within the state of Connecticut. So that's where they're drawing that number from. And then, of course, those who are unvaccinated are 3.2% greater risk of testing positive, and 13.9% greater risk of passing away, unfortunately. The health district continues to contact trace, although with the sheer numbers that we're dealing with now, we've had to refocus our priorities, and so we're working hard to support youth sports, daycares, in their efforts to control spread within their ranks, and then are also still doing community-based contact tracing, focusing on school-age kids, again, to support our schools in the community. I did speak today with Dr. Ayer, UConn Student Health and Wellness. As Ryan pointed out, the kids are coming back to campus this weekend. The Dr. Ayer does have all our resources lined up for the weekly surveillance testing. They're going to be doing not daily, but they're going to be having frequent afternoon booster clinics available for the kids. For those who happen to come back to campus not being fully boosted, there is a deadline of February 4th that the kids have been made aware of for everybody to be boosted. And so they seem to be working diligently to be appropriately prepared for this for the start of the in-person learning starting next week. And then I know that Ryan and his team and Pat Schneider and her staff, and then Adam Libros have all been working hard to try to continue with the ongoing efforts to get N95 masks and self-tests out to the population. Quite a few tests have come down from the state. All of our municipalities have been working hard to get those resources to the residents. And the health district just wants to thank, I think I did this last time, I'm going to do it again, the Ryan and the town staff and all the town staffs within the health district and their efforts to get these kids out to the community, because they're an important tool. And so I'll leave it there and be glad to answer any questions anybody may have.
You're muted, Madam Mayor.
Data from the state, which is recorded a little more frequently than then we get to hear it, sometimes tracks variants. It seems Delta still has by far the highest number of cases, and Omicron is really quite a ways behind it. What are you seeing in terms of which variant is actually infecting people today?
So I haven't looked at the latest states data. I'm interested. I didn't hear that first part, Mayor, on where you saw those figures, because the Yale New Haven Health Network is reporting that 95% of the cases they're observing are Omicron, and 5% are Delta or others. And so, I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of the cases in the state of Connecticut have been Omicron. It's really Omicron that's been driving this current surge. I just don't have the specific numbers at my fingertips right now.
Those may have been cumulative numbers, which would have put the Delta at a higher number.
Yeah, no, the recent surge, the vast majority of them have been Omicron, and that's why we're having the surge, because of the highly infectious nature of this particular variant.
Mr. Osberger, followed by Mr. Coleman.
Hi, Rob. I kind of caught the tail end of what you were saying there. Did you have any concerns in 5 days when they go back to full time at UConn? With UConn's protocols and, of course, the president leaving.
Well, anytime, Mansfield is unique in that it has a large segment of its population, which moves around in kind of a uniform manner. And what that has revealed to me, as somebody who deals with population health, how much of an influence the university population really has on the Mansfield and broader community in terms of the data. And so, when you get that many people, that large a percentage of the population moving around all at once, within the setting of a pandemic, it always raises a certain uncertainty as to what may or may not happen. So, am I concerned? I don't know if I'm concerned, but definitely watching very closely.
Very good.
Yep.
Mr. Coleman.
We have budget season coming up, and I think that's going to probably require us at some point to have in-person meetings. I'm not sure how we can do such a thing virtually. At this particular moment, it seems as though we're possibly past peak, at least with the Omicron variant. How do you see the near future for budget season and in-person meetings?
Well, as I said a little bit ago, that the number, the prevalence, both the prevalence and the incidence rates remain extremely high, higher than we've ever seen them during the course of this pandemic, and it's still going to take some time, I think, before we get down to levels in which it's the risk of transmission isn't characterized as high, and so that will take some time, and so I think until I think we see substantially lower numbers, both prevalence and in the incidence rates, I think that it would be appropriate for the town to do anything they can do to prevent the spread of infection both within this body and within those that might be participating in meetings.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Aylesworth.
Rob, I had a sort of question related to Charlie's about UConn returning. I know that they're returning under they have like a color-coded system to help their students understand the different restrictions that are in place, and they're opening at a code red. I'm not really sure what that entails and how that's different from where they've been, but I think, maybe I'm incorrect about this, that they haven't actually operated thus far, with the exception perhaps of some of the early quarantines at the beginning of last year, under Code Red. And so I'm curious if you can enlighten us about what it means and whether it's something that UConn has gone in and out of before.
Unfortunately, I am not entirely sure of the thresholds and measures they use to establish those categories. I vaguely recall some narrative coming out of university leadership in which they were kind of comparing their level, their coding system, and trying to reconcile that with what town of Mansfield's doing, what the state of Connecticut's doing. So in my mind at that time, I didn't really understand if there's any necessarily clear framework to their system. There very well may be. I just don't know what it is, and I too can't recall whether or not they've ever been in red until now. So I'm in a similar situation. I could certainly ask the question and see what the structure is.
I think it would be helpful to some extent, just given that I just pulled it up on their website, and the sort of, I think they've been in orange for most of this time, where indoor masks are required, but they're not really restricting any other activity in terms of gatherings, in terms of distancing. And red seems to limit event spaces and meetings, to limit large indoor gatherings, or have say no large indoor gatherings, and to increase surveillance testing. And so I am hopeful that UConn is doing all of those things, but I am a little skeptical, given that I am sure that some of the establishments that students frequent just off campus have been full these past weekends, and I've been watching the UConn men and women play basketball in a stadium full of people, and I have to imagine that when students return, even though I know they've been asking people to wear masks and they've required vaccination to enter the stadium for the general public, Code Red seems to suggest no indoor gatherings for students. So are they going to prohibit students from attending basketball games? That seems unlikely to me. Be that as it may, my concern, and this is sort of a weird virology question, maybe more than anything, is as a population, it's been sort of shocking how little we've been able to do to control Omicron across the world. Certainly no one has imposed restrictions like we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, certainly not in the United States, but be that as it may, even with people being careful, it seems as if this has spread pretty rapidly. But it also seems as if it's peaking and cresting just as quickly, and that the positivity rate has dropped dramatically in the last several days in Connecticut. Given that we have this really large population of people who we have to assume, 11% at least of our COVID positive moving back into town, because that's where the population is at, or somewhere thereabouts. Is there an opportunity from a virus perspective for there to be a mini outbreak if everyone sort of comes together all at once and who haven't been seeing each other, or should would it be more accurate to expect that our numbers will continue to mirror what's happening across the state and the country, and that the population is also returning with natural immunity, with vaccination and boosters, et cetera, and so we shouldn't be as concerned?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I certainly I think there's going to be a behavioral component to this. There's going to be there's a lot of factors involved here. Certainly the percentage of vaccine coverage amongst the student population is a factor. The behavior of the students is a factor. And I think those are kind of unique to a certain degree to that population. All the other factors that kind of affect population health, I think, are going to be similar to the broader population. So then on one side you have a highly vaccinated population that presumably is going to be highly boosted by February 4th. at a much greater rate than the broader population, both in Mansfield and the surrounding towns. Perhaps offset a bit by some behavioral and social gathering issues that could be occurring on and off campus, as students like to do when they come back together. So it's hard to say for sure, how much of a factor those variables will be when they do come back, which is, well, I said before, we're going to be watching it very closely.
Thanks. I have a question for Ryan and Holly. I know a lot of organizations have had operations interrupted, lots of companies, et cetera, by COVID among the staff. And I'm just wondering if either of you could provide a quick update about what's happened among Mansfield staff over this surge, and whether we've been facing any operational challenges in some of our departments that deal with operations, like Public Works in the winter and the fire department, et cetera.
I'll start, and Holly can chime in with any other thoughts she might have. So we've definitely been affected in the sense that, just like the greater population of residents in our community, we've had a number of positive cases, and at times, without obviously delving into department-specific detail that wouldn't be appropriate to share in a public meeting. And we've had departments that have been, I think, close to sort of on that tipping point of being able to function, having that critical mass. And it's been close, but we've I think just dodged it. Been able to haven't had to close an office, so to speak, yet. Getting by with in some cases greatly diminished staffing. Knock on wood. I don't think we've been hit as hard as a lot of organizations have, certainly that I've heard about, where it's really, gone through an entire organization. And I know some towns have had to, at least temporarily, close down their town halls or community centers or what have you. So we haven't had to do that yet. And since you specifically mentioned our DPW, during the last couple storm events, at a time when Connecticut DOT had a greatly diminished workforce and was worried about, I think, fielding a team and getting out and plowing the state roads. Our folks, fortunately, we didn't have anybody, out due to COVID at that time. So I'd like to think it's some of the protocols that we have in place and adherence to those protocols. And it's not just, dumb luck that we haven't been more impacted, but, certainly we've been feeling some pain points. Not going to say we aren't, but we've been able to soldier on and sort of that next person up mentality of getting it done when their colleagues are out. But Holly, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, and it's I'd echo everything that Ryan had to say with regards to that. And kudos to the partnership with Rob Miller and his staff and Eastern Highlands Health, because we're on the phone with each other. And a staff that, when they have either tested positive or come in close contact, have been forthcoming and telling us so that we can quarantine them or give them instructions as to what they need to do to eliminate, as Ryan said, having to close down, a department or, suffer operations in an area. So it's truly is a team effort. And I guess the good thing today, Ben, my phone didn't ring once with somebody saying I've tested positive or I've been a close contact.
Thanks.
Madam Mayor, you muted.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm trying a new experiment with easy muting, and I keep forgetting. You're up.
Yeah, I know we have a few speakers on deck, so I don't want to hold up the discussion too much more on their account or for their account. But I did just want to say that we have received our third allocation of rapid home test kits from the state. In this case, it was 1,000 tests that we received at the tail end of last week. And so I expect in the next day, the plan that we've formulated for distribution of those kits will kick into gear. That includes more distributions to local businesses, more focus on vulnerable populations. And so we're going to be pushing out details of how members of the targeted groups that we're focusing on will be able to request home test kits. Obviously, I think we're all hoping that the federal website that was propped up this past week, that the kits that families, individuals and families are able to order through that site, that those start showing up at people's doorsteps soon. But we continue to push out, basically the kits that were provided, and trying to do that as timely as possible. And I also wanted to, well, actually, let me also just thank, one other player in all this that hasn't gotten special thanks. That's the community center, because we were using the community center for, and we'll continue to use the community center for distribution specifically to those local businesses that have been selected for kits using a random sampling methodology that we're using. And so I don't want to diminish the contributions of the community center, helping to make sure that those distributions happen smoothly. But I also just wanted to touch on, and folks may have seen sort of our inaugural post of this on our Facebook page, the town's Facebook page, but we're working closely with Mansfield Public Schools right now on a message centered around the importance of youth vaccination, and with particular focus on the 5 to 11-year-olds. So we've been working very closely with the administration and school counselors there, school nurses, to put together some messaging that'll go to our families, parents with young kids, really encouraging them if they have any questions or concerns at this point, if there's been a barrier, an impediment, something holding them back from getting their child vaccinated, really urging them to talk to their doctor, their pediatrician, trusted source, and ask them the question of what they think would be in the best interest of their child. As has been commented on a few different times in recent council meetings, the rate of full vaccination, or the level of full vaccination for kids 5 to 11 in our community is in the low 40s of percents. And while that's actually, I think, still continues to be the highest in our 10-town health district, it's below 50%, and that's not really where I think collectively we want to be. And so we're working, and we'll continue to work with the school district on a sustained messaging campaign with resources, some put out by state and federal sources, including the CDC, about youth vaccination. And again, the really important thing is just encouraging people to consult with their children's doctor, their pediatrician, about vaccination and the benefits of it. So I just want to make sure the council is aware that those wheels are in motion.
Thank you. Mr. Osberger.
Ryan, as you were aware, we came across the series of the masks that were recalled. What's the protocol now for getting those replaced?
So happy to report that none of the masks that were part of the distribution that we received have been recalled. We confirmed that with the state because there were a number of questions that came up to that effect. We tried to push that messaging out. Perhaps we should do so again to make sure it gets out there, but nothing that we made available to the public in our first mass distribution event or subsequent to that, to my knowledge, based on the inquiries that our team has made and that a number of towns made to the state. I don't believe we have any reason to be concerned about the masks that we distributed, but Mr. Miller has his hand up, so perhaps there's a caveat.
I just have a further update on that matter. After further dialogue with state health department officials, it's important to note that the recall are for N95 masks as it pertains to occupational settings. N95s are actually not masks; they're technically respirators, and when properly used or used appropriately in an occupational or a clinical setting, that would be the circumstances under which it would be inappropriate to not use a recalled mask. As a source control tool for the general population, it's still plausible use because they're not using it in an occupational setting. In fact, N95 masks for some people who have breathing issues, upper respiratory issues, or COPD probably shouldn't use an N95 anyway because they're much more tighter fitting. They have a seal around they have a much tighter seal around the nose and the mouth. But that being said, I think the message I want to send here tonight is that even if the town did have some recalled N95s, they would still be appropriate to use for source control. And that means if people are potentially asymptomatic and infectious, it would still protect the others around them if they were to actually give off and be shedding the virus.
Thanks, Rob. That's very helpful.
My question, Rob, is when are they going to invent a mask that doesn't fog up your glasses?
Well, the N95, if you actually get it fit tested for occupational use, is very tight, and so it won't fog up your glasses, but it's not comfortable.
Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask the sort of clarifying question about what Charlie raised. There had been some social media posts going around the state about a letter the state had sent in October about some masks from the manufacturer that the town distributed that had been recalled over the summer. And apparently sometime in September, October, the state had given some of those out. There was a chart attached to that recall that asked you to match up a lot number on your mask with a serial number. And when I look at the box of masks that I got, I have a lot number that is on that list. And I have a serial number that's on that list too. But my understanding of how one needs to read that chart is in order for the masks to be recalled, your lot number and the serial number must be next to each other on the chart. Is that correct?
Well, I have to admit, I'd have to reread those because you're right. It's a two-step process to determine whether your particular mask is actually on the recall list. And so if you're a clinician or using the mask in an occupational setting for an occupational purpose, then I think it's important to go through that process. What happened with, at some point in time, these N95 masks weren't just earmarked for the general public. I think they were also going to be available to clinicians in an occupational setting. And so it was absolutely necessary and appropriate for the state to identify and try to pool all those masks so that there was a little risk of any of these recalled masks getting to clinicians or other professionals that need them in an occupational setting. For the purpose of the general public, as I said, they're still okay to use as source protection.
So let me just, I understand what you're saying, Rob. I think there's a segment of the general public who, understanding that they're not going to go get their mask professionally fit tested, would nevertheless like to achieve as close to a clinical level of protection as they can. And my understanding from the communication that you shared from the state and what Ryan just said is that OSHA standards notwithstanding about clinical versus non-clinical use of an N95 mask, it is still nevertheless the case that the state did not distribute any of the recalled masks to municipalities and therefore municipalities out to the public in December and early January.
That is correct.
That's our collective understanding at this point, and your description of how you think you understanding or lining up the two numbers, my understanding is the same as yours that you just offered.
So when I saw those posts, I went and ran into my bathroom and tried to find the box and freaked out and said, oh, wait, my two numbers are on this list. And I sent an email at 1:00 in the morning saying, what's going on? But in fact, the numbers weren't next to each other on the list. And so my masks are not recalled. And I've been wearing them in the grocery store and they're a little bit more uncomfortable, but there's the first mask I've ever worn where I don't feel like I'm just breathing right out of the sides of it. So they're doing their job.
Absolutely. They are more protective, no doubt.
All right. Any further questions regarding COVID? I would like to call your attention to the fact that it's already 8:00 and we have a number of other important items on our agenda. Any further questions? Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Miller.
You're welcome. Good evening.
Always a pleasure to have you, whether we like it or not.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. Good evening, everybody.
All right. The next item on our agenda is appointment to council committees. And I want to direct you to page 37. Let me get there again. We have on page 38, we have a list of committees with the vacancies. I'd like to go down the list starting at the beginning. We don't have a problem at the Discovery Depot. We do have a problem at the Downtown Partnership. Mr. Bruder has resigned from the Downtown Partnership, which leaves us with 2 appointments. And I would like to nominate Mr. Coleman and Mr. Shuren to fill those 2 appointments. Can I have a motion to that effect, please?
Mayor, I'd be happy to make the motion. Do you want to do each of these individually?
Yes.
Okay, I move to nominate Mr. Coleman and Mr. Shuren to the Downtown Partnership Board of Directors.
Is there a second? Ms. Berthelot seconds. Is there any discussion? I just want to point out that we have tried to have one of our Republican members on this board for a while, and I'm very glad that Mr. Coleman has stepped up and volunteered. Is there any opposition to these 2 nominees to the Downtown Partnership? Any abstentions? Hearing none, I rule that this has been adopted unanimously. Congratulations. The Eastern Highland Health District, we have an appointment there, and I'm trying to locate a person with a public health or health background to fill this slot. Economic Development, we have 2 council members who serve ex officio. Mr. Shaken is currently there. Mr. Coleman would like to join, and I also serve. What I would entertain is a motion to relieve Mr. Shaken of his responsibility and to appoint Mr. Coleman in his place. Mr. Osberger?
So moved.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Shaken. Does anybody object to this appointment? Or wish to abstain? Hearing none, motion is approved unanimously. We do have an appointment for the Sustainability Committee available. Is there anybody who wishes to serve on the Sustainability Committee? Well, we're going to have to find somebody because this one is important, particularly since we are going up for a renewed certification from Sustainable Connecticut. Mr. Osberger?
Madam Mayor, in any of these appointments, do we have a schedule of when they meet?
Yes. That's all public agencies. They have a 12-month schedule. Sustainability, I believe, meets monthly.
I understand that. I'm speaking of the specific night that they meet or day or.
I'm not aware of what it is right now. Miss Chain, are you aware? Mr. Fertoni, you're on that committee.
Yeah, I was just going to say, they meet the second Wednesday of each month.
Okay.
Usually at 6 o'clock.
I only bring that up because I have other commitments on certain nights, and so I don't want to overstep or step on one.
Okay, so were you volunteering, Mr. Osberger?
For sustainability?
Yes.
Yes, I'll volunteer for that.
Thank you. So all those in favor of Mr. Osberger to be nominated to the Sustainability Committee, please raise your hands.
You need a motion, Tony.
Oh, okay. Let's start with a motion to appoint Mr. Osberger to Sustainability. Mr. Coleman nominates a second. Mr. Fertoni seconds. Is there anybody who wishes to abstain? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the opposition? All right, I rule that this has been adopted unanimously.
I just have a question.
Yes?
Now, in addition to Mr. Osberger, is there a second one? Am I still on or?
You're still on.
Yeah, that's what I just want to make sure of that.
Yeah, I was just filling a vacancy.
Yeah, okay.
We do have a vacancy on Town Gown Committee as well. This one is going to be important, and I would really like somebody on the council who has been engaged in building this relationship. This is a tricky committee. These folks are not generally comfortable with hostility. So this has to be a positive endeavor going forward. Is there anybody?
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, which one you were speaking of?
Town Gown. Mr. Coleman,
Who's on that committee right now?
me and the town manager, and Mr. Holenko,
Who?
Eric?
Holenko.
Yeah. I'll volunteer for that.
I worry about you getting overloaded.
How many times does that meet? Once a month?
A little bit less often than that. It's about 5 times a year. I think we need, on this one, I think we need another Democrat, frankly.
I don't like the sounds of that. You can't pick people by
But we
color.
do, I like
You got a ready and able and willing person who's an alumni of the University of Connecticut who could probably offer some pretty good, insight.
I agree with Brian. I'll move to add Brian to the Town University Relations Committee. If there's nobody else willing to volunteer, it sounds like Brian's got the job.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll hurriedly second that.
Okay, does anybody wish to object or to abstain? All right, Mr. Coleman, you also are now on the Town Gown Committee.
Great.
We have the Transportation Advisory Committee, which has Mr. Osberger and Mr. Bruder. And the commit we have formally appointed, the list of standing committees omits the fact that Mr. Coleman has already been added to the Personnel Committee.
Mayor, do we need to formally appoint you to the Capital Region Council of Governments? Or Ryan? I recall us doing that at the beginning of terms in the past. I'm just curious if it's on here because we are required to formally appoint someone.
Well, you could always do it. I don't know if we're required, but are you going to do that, Mr. Shaken?
If it's necessary, and who is it, you or Ryan?
Yeah, it would be both of us. Yep.
So I move to appoint mayor and the town manager to the Capital Region Council of Governments.
Is there a second to Mr. Shaken's motion? Mr. Katzenberger, Mr. Osberger, were you seconding?
No, actually, I was going to say, are we getting ahead of ourselves for the Transportation Advisory Committee with replacing Sam?
No.
We're not replacing Sam.
I see. So he's staying on that one?
Yes.
Mr. Bruder has taken a month's leave of absence, and we'll see what happens next.
I see. Okay, very good. Okay.
All right, so Mr. Shaken has nominated, Mr. Katzenberger has seconded, appointing me and the town manager to CROG. Is there any objection? All those, any abstentions? Motion is carried unanimously. I have been asked to chair the Personnel and Finance Committee of CROG, whose primary responsibility is evaluating the new executive director. The new executive director is Matt Hart. Having evaluated Mr. Hart several times myself already, I think this is a job I can manage without too much difficulty. The finance part of it is another question altogether, but we'll see how that goes. Mr. Osberger?
Madam Mayor, did you think that he would ever be through with you, or?
Well, frankly, I hope not. it's one of the advantages of being in this business for a while, that you get to know people as they progress through their lives. So, all right, so that takes care of that. So the next item on the agenda is the Regional Youth Diversion Programming. Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to turn things over to our Human Services Director and our Youth Services Program Supervisor momentarily, but just to tee things up briefly while they come online. My understanding is that going back the better part of 2 years, February 2020, I think it was, the council sent some pretty clear direction to our Youth Services Bureau that there was shared interest and desire to see us explore alternative ways or promote restorative justice in youth that maybe have gone down a path where there's some transgressions involved, and to promote equity and ultimately give folks an opportunity to hopefully revisit their transgressions and pursue, I guess, what might be called rehabilitation in a way that is frankly more constructive than the penal system would have to offer in traditional, courtroom setting would offer. So with that, a lot of work has been done in recent months. Things kind of went on hiatus because of the pandemic, not surprisingly. But starting in late summer, early fall, the proverbial reset button was hit. And there's been a lot of discussions with our other communities that comprise the regional school district about a regional approach to a youth justice diversion program. So without any further ado, Pat, I'll turn it over to you first, or directly to Katie, but I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you a little bit of an overview. We're very happy to be here at this point. We're kind of seeing the birth of a new restorative justice program. We think it's great that we're partnering and so successfully with the two other communities that also we have a regional school system. We think this is going to be a great opportunity for youth to experience restorative justice versus the court system, or in some cases, it's just dismissed. Research shows that intervention to keep kids out of the court system and to help them develop resiliency, to support their families, and to restore relationship and community that might have been severed by whatever, activity that was done, is very effective in kind of diverting the kids from being, a lifetime of poor behavior choices. So Katie and her staff have been working really diligently on this. Lots of training, lots of work with the state organization and the liaison that we have, who has many years of experience. So I think we've really come to a great point, and I'm hopeful tonight that you all will agree. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask when we'd be happy to answer those questions. I don't know, Katie, if you want to, give a little more update or not before we turn it over to questions. I know we've been before the council on this topic before. So did you want to say anything, Katie?
Sure. Just thank you all for having us back today to look at the drafts of the memorandums of agreement that you as town council had authorized us to move forward in drafting and putting together with the hopes of creating this regional diversion team. We are so excited. The folks at EO are so excited. The folks in Ashford, the folks in Willington, the folks at Mansfield Middle School are so excited that there is momentum behind this movement to serve our youth. And so thank you for being a part of that. We're happy to answer any questions about the MOUs or restorative justice, or what we envision the Willington, Ashford, Mansfield restorative diversion team to be.
Ms. Berthelot.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Question. Again, this is fantastic. You know how much I care about this. Thank you so very much for working so hard on it. Just a little clarification, so I understand a little bit more what we're looking at. So, am I correct to say that the memorandum of understanding is about the implementation of whatever the board, I'll call it for lack of a better word, but the adjudicator, the whoever sort of reviews the case, whatever is recommended, it's a commitment by the towns to follow up with that. Is that what this particular agreement is about?
Yes. They, and actually the board that will hear it, the group that will actually hear it will rotate in members who would work with the youth or have direct response. So you might have resident troopers, for example, work in all three of the communities. You'd have maybe the same resident trooper who was on the board, but you would have possibly people from the different areas related for those specific students. And then all of the case management would be handled by the individual town YSB.
So if I could follow up on that. So how will the board be created? What will be the mechanism for that? And and will there be another a memorandum of understanding between the communities on that? How will that work?
So it's actually already been created, and there will be members that rotate in. They've done their first orientation. They've done a lot of training. That's, so that's already set up. So that once the agreement is signed, they'd be ready to go.
So is it a standing board, the membership on the board, and how many people will be on the board? And I understand that they're getting trained now, so it sounds like it's a standing board. And who will choose who's on the board, or who has chosen who's on the board?
Katie, would you like to comment on that?
So the way most youth service bureaus in the state of Connecticut do it, they don't do it through formal council appointment or committees on committees or anything to that degree. They really do look to the specific YSBs serving the communities that it serves to identify who are those stakeholders that can really be there in a restorative sense to support the youth. So for most of the towns, there's a designee from the sending schools. So for us, we have designees from E.O. Smith, from Mansfield Middle, from Ashford School, and then from Hall Memorial Middle School over in Willington. And those have been folks who have been identified through the school districts as would be a good fit and available to attend and participate. And then we have other community stakeholders who we, know to be connected to services that support youth. We have, a member from Beacon Health Options. We have a member from Favor Connecticut. We have other community members who also in their roles professionally work within organizations that do support youth and families. So it's really about building a board that can come together to create a restorative circle and really having the right people in the right circle with the right kids. So as Pat has alluded to, we do anticipate it to be a rotating board, which means there could be a time where, someone new shares an interest in wanting to support and serve, and we could look at if there is that need to onboard them and have them join a circle, whether it's for someone who would participate in every meeting because they have a high connectivity amongst all three communities, or if it would just be someone who might only go to a board meeting if there's a Mansfield Middle School student being seen, because that's where their biggest stakeholder and connection is. And it being a regional board, what we're really looking for, like I said, is to have the right people at the table. So there's not, 20 adults in a room, but there's 8 of the right adults in the room working with that youth and family to help them rebridge back into their community, and to know that the community has their back and is cheering them on in reconnecting and building those supports. So because it isn't a formal appointee process, there is some fluidity that exists should we need to recruit because maybe we're having members who aren't as available as they thought to participate, or if someone comes forward and says, you know, here's my expertise, here's my connection, and here's my commitment to restorative justice, looking at, you know, is there a gap that we can fill with that?
Right. So, for example, if there was a lot of cases having to do with substance abuse, we may say, geez, we really need to have somebody on board who's an expert in that area and really understands the resources and the process. So, you know, you have that opportunity to add members as well if you feel that you're missing an expertise area.
And if I could just ask one more question, and then I will stop. And who will be, or what will be the trigger for the board being called together?
So we'll be anticipating having a standing meeting for the second Thursday of the month to anticipate hearing cases once everyone agrees that we're ready to move forward and sign the memorandums of agreement. And then Sarah Dufresne, who is a member of our Youth Services Bureau, will be serving in the role as coordinator. So she will be the one who does the organizational aspect of knowing what referrals have come in from what towns and contacting the individuals we would want to see at those meetings and scheduling with the families to be there for those times in those places. So some folks might, you know, be at a diversion team meeting once a month, and some folks who are on the board might only go to a couple a year, depending on who the referees are.
It seems to me that this memorandum of agreement omits a whole lot of important information, like who constitutes this initiating group. I mean, you have a group, and how did it get chosen? And it sounds like it's appointed, people are chosen by the various youth service boards, but it is not clear to me that that is even something that has been agreed to. So I'm listening to your answers to Ms. Berthelot's questions, and I'm hearing that there is a structure that people have agreed to implement and that they have agreed to take responsibility for, but it doesn't show anywhere in the materials that we've received, and it certainly isn't in the agreement. I would very much like to see a description of the structure, maybe not as part of the formal agreement, but it would certainly help me understand what actually is going to happen. And I'm partly concerned with it because that kind of a document commits communities to doing something. And you obviously have that kind of a commitment beyond what is in this agreement. I mean, according to this agreement, everything just goes back to the towns and they deal with it on their own. But that's not true because there is a reference to a board, and you do have a board, and you have scheduled meetings. So there's something else here that I just don't understand or don't see, and I would very much like to see it.
Madam Mayor, I just, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to let you know that we've worked with, there is actually a structure in the state through CYSA and about, I'm going to call it a juvenile review board for, I know that the term is evolving, but so, and that's really, they do have a structure and have been, that liaison has been working with the towns to create it. The agreement is just, it is how the towns will handle it beyond once it comes to the board. It's not establishing the board per se. I'm talking specifically about the agreement. So it sounds like you'd like more of a description of what these diversion, the diversion team is about.
Yes. And where they get their authority, how they are chosen. I mean, clearly there's got to be flexibility, but if you're going to take an action that has to do with the kids staying out of the prison system, you've got to have some kind of authority to do it. And I don't in the documents which we're looking at, I see no authority. It makes me sound like an authoritarian, but that's not what I'm after. It's not at all clear to me from reading these documents what happens when a kid gets in trouble in school and who they end up seeing.
Right.
And
So
that's what I would like to see.
it's actually not so much in school, it's anywhere in the community. And it's, do we send them through the route of the court system, or do we send them here and they have to agree to specific things in order to come through this system? It's diverting them from the court, and that comes through the legal system. In order to do it, though, you have to have an established juvenile review board. In order for your community to be eligible to do that, youth from your community, you have to have this type of an established board. So, which is recognized.
I understand, but there's nothing in these agreements that helps me understand what that board is, how it's chosen, or what it is empowered to do. And I would very much like to see that at some point, even if you're just referring me to under statutory authority, that this is what you're going to do. Mr. Aylesworth.
Yeah, I just, Pat touched on one of the things I was going to bring up, which was I know that they were receiving, advice and counsel from the statewide organization or outfit that Katie mentioned in terms of, kind of trying to figure out how best to model this agreement. And I know some of the same questions that you're raising now are questions that I had in terms of looking at this and understanding, trying to wrap my head around, I guess you'd say some of the intentional fluidity that was being hard baked into this. But since Attorney Deneen is here and he has been consulted along the way in the crafting of this document, I just wanted to give Kevin an opportunity to share some of his thoughts, if he's actually by a computer and listening right now.
I am. Thank you. So my understanding is, and we've worked through a number of the iterations, and Mayor, was a lot of the same questions that you're asking now. And my understanding from this agreement was really that it was not creating, and we had this discussion, formally creating a regional youth diversionary board on that, and that it was all going to be returned to each individual municipality's Youth Services Bureau to do that, and then in coordination with and tapping the talents and abilities that each can bring to the table. So it was purposely not to create a regional board. I think what seems to be returning from Pat and Katie is that what they're referring to a board is really the people they can tap for help on those various items that are on there. And it was to formalize the cooperation between the individual youth services boards. So if Pat or Katie, if I'm off base, that's my understanding of how we would work through this with the other towns.
So that's correct. So the idea of a board, it's not the same as an advisory board. It's not the same as a commission or committee. And we actually specifically use the word team rather than board in naming this program to really try to differentiate between the two, because the authority for this to occur happens at the state level. It comes through the state statute that authorizes juvenile review boards or diversion programs hosted by youth service bureaus or in partnership with youth service bureaus, with whether it's being held by the local police department or another kind of service contract holder. But that authority for youth to be seen in diversion comes from the state statute given to the diversion programs. And that's all done through the Connecticut Youth Services Association. And I'm happy to, send along any documents that might be helpful with that, because there is a JRB policy procedures manual that CYSA does put out. We also have our own specific policy protocol procedures that we have shared with our inaugural group of team members who are going to be supporting those youth. And it walks through, step by step, how does a youth get referred? What happens? When would a referral potentially go back to the original referring source? And so all of those things do exist as documents. They just aren't in your packet, but I'm happy to send them along if that would be helpful in kind of making the process seem more familiar, because really it is that state statute from Connecticut that youth service bureaus as a whole serve as a community support hub, and that many youth service bureaus in the state of Connecticut do specifically have a diversion program that sees cases that are appropriate for diversion, and they do really leave what those cases are up to the YSBs as the experts in youth.
Well, I would very much like to see some real description. So what you're saying is that this is not really a regional program. This is an agreement by 3 towns to do what? Are we agreeing to be regional, or are we agreeing to each do our own thing?
So the way these are written is it is designed for the regional collaboration for the 3 towns to create a diversion program. And what that program looks like for the team aspect of it is working with a team to have the youth come together for a restorative circle. And as part of that, the youth and circle members and the youth family develop a restorative justice contract. Once that contract has been developed with that youth, their connection, the youth's connection, reverts back to their own individual youth service bureaus, who are going to be responsible for the case management components of those diversions agreed upon in the diversion contract. And then at the period of time where they have completed those diversions, they would then be invited back to a closing circle with members of the team to celebrate their success. So the board in and of itself, connection with the youth tends to be at the start and at the end of when a case is being seen, rather than throughout. The work that happens throughout in that case management is really done by the individual youth service bureaus and their case management services. So for us, our team has, 3 licensed clinicians, including myself, that, any number of us could be tasked with taking on a case management component for a youth who's referred, depending on what the need is, and caseloads and, whatever the case may be. So any Mansfield youth that came through that diversion program would go through Circle, develop an agreed upon contract of what they're going to do to, restore the best they can their connection to the community, repair harms that have been done, and to, go through a series of things that will help them learn and kind of overlearn how to better be in community and understand the harm done that, was in a lot of times unintentional or unrecognized in that moment. And so then, from that circle, from that contract, they continue with the individual youth service bureaus for that follow-up and case management. So it doesn't create a new set of organization or agency in the sense that the 3 youth service bureaus will not become a regional youth service bureau. And we specifically wrote it this way, that each town remains responsible for their youth who are going, and, whatever funds they have to support that youth through their own individual case management aspects would be referred back out to the sending towns. But it's the 3 youth service bureaus agreeing that, with our collaborations, with our connections to the community, that will bring the right people to the table, and we will, as youth service bureaus, do the case management follow-up.
Thank you. I think, Ms. Schneider, and I think after this we should have a motion, unless other people have other serious questions.
The reason for the regional approach is because if our youth got in trouble with, and they often do because they go to school together, with a youth from a town that does not have a diversion program, then they can't send one youth through a diversion program and not another. So it would mean that even if we established one without this regional approach, it would mean that if one of our youth got in trouble with someone who didn't happen to have access to a diversion program, then our youth could not go through diversion, which would be a real loss. So that was really the idea behind doing an approach like this, to make sure that, you know, our youth could access the service. And Columbia, which we do have some students from, Columbia already has a youth service bureau specific to them. So that would mean if, you know, everybody would have an avenue if you know, one of the kids got in trouble. So that was the idea around that.
Mr. Osberger.
Yeah, I would have to, I would say that all the wonderful things that Mansfield Youth Services Bureau has done through the years, I think this is a wonderful program. You know, I'm glad we're spearheading this. I do believe, though, I have to shadow and or mirror Madam Mayor's comments with regard to understanding what the structure should be. You know, it seems like that there is some sort of an authority, and it almost looks like we've got a couple selectmen and Ryan, you know, who is really the body and who's doing the decision making. You know, certainly something on the region, on this local level here, we need to know what's going on. So with that, I have to agree with her. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Berthelot,
I was going to put a motion on the table.
please.
Move effective January 24th, 2022, to authorize the town manager, in accordance with the agreement as attached, to enter into a memorandum of agreement between the town of Mansfield, Willington, and Ashford to formally authorize the establishment of the Mansfield, Willington, Ashford Restorative Diversion Team that is supported by the youth services program staff of the 3 member towns.
Is there a second? Mr. Coleman seconds. Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from this motion? Wait, I should start. Is there any further discussion? All right, anybody wish to abstain? Anybody wish to vote in the negative? Then the motion has been adopted unanimously. Thank you very much for your work on this. One just side question: what happens to VOAG people who are not members of either of these towns? That's a
So
question.
depending on where a VOAG student's initiating district is, they might already have access to a diversion program through their sending town districts. We are actually one few youth service bureaus in Connecticut that as of yet hadn't yet created a diversion program. So we are happy to be coming to that table. And one of the things that is amazing about youth service bureaus is that we work together, we're non-competitive. And so if there was ever a case that arose where, you know, maybe someone did get in trouble, and in order for a Mansfield youth to be seen through diversion, we have to look at an individual instance of, can we partner with the sending town to take on the case management, even if they might just be seen in circle with us, because that would kind of initiate the mechanism. And we have been lucky enough to be invited to do that at one point with Andover, Heber, and Marlborough. And they had been very gracious in offering their board while we took on the case management component for a Mansfield youth who happened to get in trouble with the Columbia youth. And that worked out better for the Mansfield youth at that time than it could have been if they had gotten into trouble on their own. So in those partnerships, we can get really creative without creating undue burden. So we're very excited to be a part of this movement for restorative justice, and we know that it helps facilitate equity, and it's a wonderful thing. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for all you've done. The next item on our agenda is the proposed solar field at the town landfill. Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll keep my introduction brief, but as the council knows, the town has some pretty ambitious renewable energy goals and sustainability goals with an eye towards achieving net zero, net neutrality by 2030. And so with that in mind, one of the things that the town's been looking at, and actually I think this is the 4th time the town really pursued this in terms of things going out to an RFP, were potential locations for what at least we'll call a large scale solar field. In this case, one of the things that you'll hear about is a roughly 2.4 megawatt facility that can offset, as much of the town's energy use as possible, and again, hopefully get us as close as possible to net zero. So we did go through a competitive RFP process. There were two qualified bidders that provided proposals to the town, and the town, the facilities department in particular, in coordination and in collaboration with energy consultant Titan Gen, who we have a representative from here, Adam Teff, who will be kind of guiding us through a presentation. We have some recommendations for the council to entertain tonight about a solar field at the municipal landfill. And hopefully this will be well received, both the concept and the financial terms of this agreement. So proposed agreement, I should say. So without any further ado, Adam, want to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Adam Teff. I'm General Manager of Titan Gen. I've actually been working with the town of Mansfield now on energy related issues since 2013 or so. So I have a pretty good track record. Worked with Sherry Trahan for a long time prior to her retirement, and I heard Matt Hart's name thrown out there too. So we're really familiar with the energy issues in Mansfield, what some of the energy related goals are. And this project is actually really interesting for a number of reasons. One of the primary reasons being we actually have an incentive structure with Eversource now that can support a project like this. In the past, we've really been limited to rooftop solar installations, kind of smaller scale projects that address energy on site, which is fantastic. But we haven't really had the kind of incentive support and legislative support coming even just from above, from the state level, to help fund projects like this, where there's no load on site. The power would be going back to the grid, but there's a financial transaction involved here, which is really beneficial for Mansfield. So I do have a short presentation. I'm happy to go through that or keep this just high level. If anybody, Ryan, if you want to make a suggestion, or anyone else wants to make a suggestion as to how best to present this, I'm happy to follow your lead.
I think the slides that I've seen that we went through before, I think if you do it in sort of expedited fashion, I think it's still helpful to have the visuals for us visual learners.
Yep, fully agree. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and I'll skip over some of the fluff that just talks about Titan. We've been in business 20 years. We're a proud partner of CCM for energy procurement. So we got a long track record working with municipalities. Again, long track record working with Mansfield. We have a really tried and true RFP process that we run for towns specifically for this purpose. The steps are all very clear to us: utility bill review, site review, draft the RFP, host the site visit, answer the questions from bidders that come in, help write up a report that analyzes the results of the bid so you can feel confident that you understand what's being proposed and what the financial and environmental impacts are. We're on your side through the project implementation, and then we stay on board for a year afterward to help with the measurement and verification. So it's really a one-stop shop to help get projects like this done. In terms of the solar bid response snapshot, we had 3 Connecticut-based companies come out and do the walkthrough. We published the RFP on the state of Connecticut's website too. So, we want to try to cast a wide net and get good qualified vendors and, who could take on this project. And it's not an easy project, to be the first to admit. There are some challenges. One of those challenges being that there's no 3-phase power within a mile. So, there are some challenges with that, but they're entirely addressable, I think. So we had 3 bidders come out. We had the walkthrough on December 2nd. We looked at a number of different sites in town, but at the end of the day, our goal was really, let's find the projects that have the best intersection between the financial outcome for the town. We obviously want this to be something that makes sense in terms of either revenue or utility bill savings, but also maximizes your effort in terms of hitting some of your sustainability goals. So the two that we really focused on, one, the landfill, and the second was a possible carport for the town hall. You'll note here that the annual savings for the landfill project, there are two different varieties of this project. It could either be done under a lease agreement, where the winning bidder, in this case Verigy, they've proposed either they could lease the area in the landfill for the panels for a flat lease payment that would be paid every year to Mansfield, roughly almost $51,000 a year for 20 years. Again, they would own, maintain, operate the asset. They would take care of the groundskeeping for the area where the array would be. It's truly a turnkey, no-cost project for the town. That's the lease option. The second option for that project would be to do it under the virtual net metering program. And virtual net metering, maybe this is something you folks are familiar with, and I actually have a slide here that I think would be really helpful to walk you through how virtual net metering works. But the concept behind virtual net metering is very different than what a lot of people think of normally when they think of like rooftop solar, or if you had parking canopies, where that solar array is creating energy to be utilized at the location at which it's installed. In that case, your financial value comes from avoiding having to buy kilowatt hours from Eversource because you're creating your own. So that's kind of the traditional model. Virtual net metering is a mechanism that really created through legislation, which eliminates a lot of the barriers to rooftop solar, because what we're allowed to do is build one big array, provided we have the ground space, which in this case we do with the landfill. The energy goes back to the power grid, so it doesn't physically, find its way back, so to speak, to the locations that could be beneficiaries from the array. But instead, what you get is a financial credit. So those credits land on your bills. They're meant to mimic what happens when you are creating energy on site, which is really just to reduce your costs. But in this case, because the array is located centrally and the credits are going to different locations in town, you're not receiving the energy, you're receiving a financial equivalent of that kilowatt hour production. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. I know it's kind of a funny concept if you've never heard of it before. I think sometimes looking at it, a picture of it can help explain. But for the purposes of getting through this slide, the financial arrangement in this case for Mansfield would be, as we go through these columns here, presuming you can see my cursor here, system size, annual energy production under the lease or the virtual net metering arrangement, they're all the same. The only difference is here you'll see that under the virtual net metering, you can opt to receive a utility bill credit that in this case would be worth 15 cents. It'd be worth 15 cents for the entirety of the 20-year term for the agreement. And throughout that 20 years, you would pay for each credit at a fixed price as well. So your credit value is locked in and guaranteed. What you pay for it is locked in and guaranteed. The only thing that can fluctuate over time would be relative to how much energy is produced by the array. As we all know, we have some hot, sunny years, some colder, cloudier years. So we can have some variance in the production, but the terms of the credit cost and the credit value, those would not change. You would see a descending, generally speaking, if you track it over time, you will see descending production from the array year over year through the 20 years, simply because the panels are degrading and their natural ability to create energy. So one of the benefits of the lease option, in my view anyway, and again, completely up to the town, which makes the most sense for them, but one of the benefits of the lease option is that all of the production risk is on Verigy, and you get a flat payment every year. So from a cash flow perspective, it's very easy to say year over year, we're going to get the same amount of money. It's not going to shrink over time. There won't be any unexpected upside because you had a particularly sunny summer, but again, you've eliminated that production risk. At the end of the day, when you track it through 20 years, using industry standard projections of how the array would produce over time, virtual net metering option does edge out the lease in lifetime value by about, looks like maybe like 20% or so. But again, it's all about that production risk and what you're comfortable with. And if you like that predictable cash flow, then in some ways the lease can make a lot of sense. If you'd rather have the bill credits, you can do it that way as well. Moving to the carport project at the town hall, I will be the first to admit that this is not a huge moneymaker for the town. Really, I think the benefits come in the form of you would have the convenience of covered parking for folks at the town hall, just protection from the elements. And you would be able to introduce stability into that cost for that location. There is some savings. And then again, as a statement about the town's commitment to sustainability, but the real moneymaker for the town by far and away is the landfill. The major difference between, other than the financial outcome, the other major difference between the landfill and the town hall is that the town hall would be behind the meter. So that's more in line with the type of solar I referenced at the beginning of my explanation, which was the array is installed, the energy is consumed on site, and your financial value comes from reducing your Eversource bill and purchasing instead the electricity directly from the solar provider at a cost that's less than Eversource. So two different models. Larger ground mount system is, again, another term that we use sometimes is front of the meter, or it just means that the energy is going back to the grid. Let's see. And as far as the specifics between the two projects, I think that basically covers it. Vergy, they're a Hartford-based solar development group. They have won, a meaningful amount of the bids that we've run in the past. I've worked with them before. I think they're a highly qualified partner. They do good work. I think that having a local vendor that's qualified, and we're really lucky here in Connecticut because we have a lot of companies that are located in Connecticut but actually have a national presence. And the reason for that is because Connecticut has actually had a really robust solar market for a long time. So a lot of the companies that really dominate throughout the country have originated in New England, again, just by virtue that we've had a solar program for a lot longer than most states have. So again, I have zero qualms recommending them. I think that they'd be highly qualified and good for this project.
Mr. Shakin? Mr. Shakin?
I can wait until he's done. I didn't realize he had more slides.
But yeah, I'm going to try to whip through. I don't want to take up too much of everybody's time. But again, everyone likes to see pictures, so I think seeing the layout of the site is really helpful. There would be no tree clearing, no disturbing the cap. The array sits on concrete ballasted blocks, so the name of the game for projects like this is don't disturb the land. We would work hand in hand with DEEP in terms of permitting, the State Siting Council. Ultimately, they really have jurisdiction over projects like this. Anything greater than 1 megawatt AC technically bypasses planning and zoning and all of the approvals, whether that's stormwater, ensuring that the project doesn't interfere with migration patterns of protected species. I mean, you name it. It's all has to pass scrutiny with the state. So it's a really prescribed process that requires a lot of different sets of eyes on it. So I think sometimes that helps put people at ease where, Vergy is not allowed to just do whatever they want with this site. This is a very, highly regulated installation that would, involve significant amount of interaction with the state. But again, a lot of times we see these sites where sometimes you need to clear trees or move earth around in ways that can disturb wetlands and stuff like that. So luckily, given that none of these conditions exist here, it is a fairly straightforward installation. Like I said, the only hurdle to this project, which is not necessarily a hurdle, it's just something that we have to budget for and plan around, is the fact that the closest three-phase connection point is a mile away. So the way that we addressed that in the RFP was to ask every bidder to hold $1 million in their budget to account for that. Now, Eversource is going to be the final arbiter of what that cost is. We'll find out once we apply for interconnection, but all the maps that I've studied and the resources I've tapped at Eversource telling me that about $1 million or so is going to be the interconnection cost. So I think we've got our bases covered there. This slide is simply just, to offer a 20-year look in terms of how the value would accumulate for Mansfield over time, depending on which option that you chose. We don't have to labor on this too much, but you'll notice here the variable on the credit purchase, the VNM option, is just your annual savings falls every year just because we're planning for some loss of solar production every year.
Adam, it would also be worth just mentioning real quick, just because I unless there's maybe another table coming up later, that we were able to get a slightly more favorable annual lease payment offer, correct?
Yep. So Verigy, let's see if I included here. They upped the lease payment a little bit. If it's not updated here, I will update. I think if memory serves, they might have upped it to 51.
I think it's 52.5, just
52.5. Okay, yeah. So that was just a recent development in the last few days. So I think from the lease payment standpoint, 52.5. We asked for kind of the best and final number to see if they could help close that gap a little bit for the lease. And I'll make sure that everybody has an updated table. Make sure that's reflected. This is the footprint of the proposed carport at the town hall if you ultimately decide to move forward with that. So it's actually what we call a long span parking garage, where a lot of times, or parking structure, a lot of times when people envision covered parking, solar canopies, etc., they envision something that looks more like a T, where the steel beams are actually going down the middle of the lot. With a long span, the steel supports are actually on the outer edges. So it effectively makes a roof over this parking area. You don't lose any spots. But again, not a big money saver, but if it was a sustainability project that made sense for the town, this would be the best place that I identified for covered parking on town property. So just to kind of close up with some important details that I just want to make sure that the town's aware of. Part of the process here is, like I said, going through the interconnection process, which that is where Eversource will tell us the final cost that it's going to take to upgrade the three-phase line to bring access to the three-phase to this site. No matter what you do, you could, no matter how you ask Eversource, whether you ask them nicely or otherwise, they don't tell you what the interconnection cost is going to be until you go through that application process. It's part of the package here working with Verigy, so there's no extra steps that we need to take, but it's just, again, if I'm helping usher you through this process and letting you know where the sort of risks are, it's, Eversource conceivably could come back and say, oh, well, it's going to be $2 million or, it's only 500,000 or what have you. Verigy, based on the way that they bid, could, everybody would have the ability to weigh in if Eversource comes back with a, exorbitantly high number that nobody expected, and adjust the lease or VNM deal accordingly. We like to try to lock down as many of these variables as humanly possible, but this is just one that we can't know until we do the interconnection application. So I just want to make everybody aware of that. But I think we do have a very good number earmarked for that cost. The second is the bid process for this project. So we ran the bid to select Verigy. Eversource's incentive program has its own bidding structure to get an award and therefore make this project work. The way that the program is set up for 2022 is when we bid into the program, our bid is the number, in this case, 15 cents per kilowatt hour, that we're asking for Eversource to pay the project owner to compensate for and finance the project and help pass that savings back to Mansfield. I'm recommending the 15-cent number because we feel that that's a number that we can win at. It's always, we try to rely on the precedent of the previous year to tell us what a winning bid looks like. What's challenging about 2022 is that we do have a precedent. It's just from a previous program that existed for the last 9 years. Now, most of the project pro formas aren't radically different today than they were before. So I think the winning bids of the last program will likely carry over and ring true for this new program. The only variable is it is a new program after all, and different kinds of projects are eligible in this program that weren't eligible in the previous program. So, I say all this just to remind everybody that, once we go through this process, we'll have to bid into the Eversource program and be selected. Maybe the most important detail, though, is that the new program's rules really only became final about 5 months ago. So what that tells me is this is going to be a year where most folks don't have their projects together enough to be able to apply, which is going to mean of that finite pool of money, 2022 is going to be a good year to try to secure a spot in the program. And since we only have one chance for 2022, stakes are kind of high, of course, but, we've tried to design this project to give a high degree of certainty that we'll apply and be selected. My concern about 2023 is just that we'll have an entire year's worth of folks like me and other municipalities with their own projects trying to get into the program. And the amount of dollars available every year is fixed. So the more applicants you get, the more people there are scrapping over what's there. And it'll inevitably force us to bid lower into the program, which means less value back for the customer. So very, very bullish on 2022. I think it's the year to be in the program. I think we've teed this up in such a way where it's entirely possible. It would just require, that we select Verigy and finalize the lease agreement by the end of February. So I put all that out there just to give everybody a sense of the timing and where we are. And then the last detail I'll close with, which I think is a really neat one, is the energy produced by this array in year one is equal to about 95% of energy consumption across town. Now, this is a little different than being able to create energy for use on site at each individual location. But that might frankly not be possible, at least not for a long time, simply because, I know from just talking to the folks in facilities and finance that you're never going to get solar on every roof in town. There might be some roofs that are due for replacement 10 years from now, 15 years from now, etc. Some roofs just might be too small to make any sense. Some might be pitched the wrong way. You might not, for aesthetic reasons, want solar on roofs, etc. So, the idea of being able to eliminate your Eversource costs on every meter in town is, at least for now, again, things might be possible in the future with different forms of electrification and things like that. But to be able to have an array in town on your land that produces energy equal to 95% of your consumption, however you want to recognize that, has got to account for something. I'm not necessarily here to tell you how to apply that to your sustainability goals, but it's certainly a big move in the right step for that. This timeline is, again, here just for everyone's reference. I know I've thrown a lot at you, and I really appreciate everybody's time. I'm happy to answer any questions that people have. I know there's probably a few.
All right. The first question from Ben, from Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Coleman, followed by Mr. Osberger.
Hi. So thanks for coming and for doing this presentation again. You came to finance last week and we talked through this. Just in quick summary, I think this is a great idea and we ought to do it. From my read of the map, this solar array would be literally invisible to anyone who was not an employee of the Mansfield transfer station. It's just its location in that particular parcel means you might be able to catch a glimpse of it as you're throwing your trash into the bulk waste bins. But it, as these things go, seems to me to have the lowest impact of any potential site in town in terms of visual from a road, from houses, as well as environmental impact. We're literally talking about putting this on top of trash that's going to be in the ground for forever. My question is around the lease versus virtual net metering decision here. I see Ryan, I think I am reading the motion that has been suggested to us to choose the lease option of the two. And I had originally thought that maybe that makes the best idea when you tell people who are in charge of the public's money that they have a conservative option with no risk and an option where you bear some of the risk. But the more that I've thought about it, I'm actually not 100% sure that that's like the completely correct way to think about it. That we actually aren't bearing any financial risk no matter which we choose. And so I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit to that. We aren't paying anything for the construction of this project, and no matter which option we choose, Verigy will bear all of the responsibility for capital maintenance, panel goes down, they fix it without any change to the rate that they would pay us in either scenario. Is that correct?
Right. So the risk, and the risk on the VNM side is, again, I'm just going to use an outlandish example just for whatever to make a point. The array goes down for 6 months. I don't know, for whatever reason. Never seen it happen before, but again, it's like, if you're thinking like what could go wrong, the array is not producing. If the array is not producing, then the town isn't receiving credits. Granted, you don't have to buy anything if you're not receiving anything, so there's no expense related to that downtime other than perhaps if you were to start budgeting around receiving credits that for some reason didn't materialize. Again, low probability, but that really is the risk. It's not so much a risk of financial loss, it's a risk of not getting what you expect to get. And then with the lease option, let's say in that same scenario, you get 6 months of downtime, whatever, let's say it happens, in the April to October, the worst possible time, whatever. That risk is completely on Verigy. So no matter what, if that solar gets installed, production or not, and the lease arrangement, you're paid no matter what. That's how I would encourage you to think about the risk aspect.
Interesting. As far as the other way that so because we're not talking about any financial investment from us in any of these scenarios, I'm thinking also about how close we can get to sort of netting out our energy usage throughout the rest of town. And so I suppose the from a literal how much power are we producing perspective, there's no difference between the two proposals. And so it's really just a cost question, right? That if we want to bear some of that risk in exchange for around a 20% larger return from Verigy, we would choose the virtual net metering. But if we wanted a guaranteed stream of income that was around 20% lower, we would take the lease option, but that the array is still projected to produce 3 megawatts of power per year. And that is equivalent to 95% of our electric bill in the totality of town buildings, including all the schools, when you net out the existing PV, et cetera, that we are currently paying Eversource to produce by natural gas or coal in their power plants. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Same energy production, same system size, whether it's leased or VNM. And the beauty of this, right? Even though the energy is going back directly to Eversource, and it's not directly linked to reducing your on-site consumption, because this asset is going to be producing that 3 megawatts. That means that some other producer, some nat gas producer or whatever, is not going to be producing that 3 megawatts. So there is still a direct sustainability benefit. It's just kind of indirect from a Mansfield specific perspective, which at the end of the day, I mean, I'd argue it's all one planet, it's all one grid. But to answer your other question, yeah, it's the same production either way.
And then just one quick technical question, and then I'm done with questions. The power hookup, the 3-phase power that would need to get run essentially from the transfer station to 195. We've got 2 municipal buildings along that route, the library and the elementary school, both of which have some amount of solar on the roof or will have solar on the roof. But be that regardless of that, is there any benefit to the consumers, including the town, between those 2 locations to having 3-phase power on the street next to their house? Or is it literally just a connection from one place to another and there isn't any added benefit we could theoretically tap into or at one of those municipal buildings if the power was running next door?
Well, just to make sure we're thinking about the same thing. So the point of connection that we'd follow is really, and I'm just visualizing from the map, like it's more in the direction of the new and current / former Southeast School.
It doesn't follow Route 89 directly to 195?
So we actually, and again, not being a total expert on the name of the road off the top of my head, I'd have to look at the map, but you basically drive over that culvert, right? That's sort of, the water on both sides. We're going to have to bring poles basically from Southeast School up to the landfill. And that's the closest, cheapest way to do it.
Got it. So there is that power connection basically comes from Southeast or goes to Southeast now and it has to be extended.
Yeah, that's the closest point of interconnection. There's really nothing else there that could benefit from the 3-phase. Unfortunately, it's just, there are no poles there. So that'll be the route that we take.
Okay, sorry. I have one follow-up. Given that, have you gone into enough detail with your map study on that particular part of the project to be sure that you don't foresee any complication with the fact that those culverts are part of a U.S. Army Corps of Engineer owned flood mitigation system and that they probably have some say in what gets built on the side of them?
Yep, we're aware. Yep.
Thanks.
Sure.
Mr. Coleman, followed by Mr. Osberger.
Hello, Adam. Thanks for the presentation tonight.
Yeah, sure.
I have first a kind of a logistical question. We're building on a landfill, right? There's trash underneath.
Right. Yep.
Right. Okay. Is there any methane release at that site? And if there is does methane have any corrosive properties that might interfere with the equipment?
No, I don't. And Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no venting at this site, no gas venting, right?
That is correct. No gas venting.
Okay. Also, question on the number of vendors that bid. We only had 2 bidders. I would have liked to seen a little more of a competitive process. What happened there?
Yeah, so we submitted this project through the state's portal, which everybody sees it. I think the reason that we had kind of a low turnout is because this is a tough project, and I think not everybody that typically responds to projects like this in this size are really geared to the task, be able to handle a project with an extra $1 million interconnection point. What I did, because this subject came up when Ryan and I were speaking about the walkthrough and the results, and I shared with him recent bids for projects like this that we've had a variety of different levels of turnout, and shared with him what the winning bids looked like, just to get him comfortable with the fact that the response that we got from Verigy is actually still very good and within market, whether we're talking about a bid response that has 3 vendors, 2 vendors, 5 vendors that come back with a bid. So I think at the end of the day, the results from the bid are very, very good and can be justified with results of other bids for similar projects that we have also run this year.
It looks like the 2 vendors that bid on it were miles apart.
I wouldn't necessarily call this miles apart for a project like this. I've seen some bids where the numbers are double or triple different, and that requires, let's see, pulling up here. The Verigy lease. Yeah, I guess you guys, we have the one with Green Skies response. Green Skies they're a highly qualified group. They win a pretty good number of the bids that we run too. I think Verigy has kind of carved out a niche for themselves in terms of building on Connecticut landfills. Everybody had the same access to information. Everybody got the same tour. Everybody had the same timeline to abide to. We feel, just based on other bids we've run and the results of which we can share for sure, and I have shared with Ryan for similar projects, that the results that Mansfield got are the results that you get from a competitive bid with qualified vendors. And again, distributing the RFP through the state channels, everybody that would have responded or wanted to respond, definitely had an opportunity to view this and choose to come out or not come out. So I can say that the methodology we used to distribute the RFP notice was good and standard. And beyond that, we can't drag anybody out to.
What's the criteria to be a qualified vendor?
When we ask for everybody's the financial details of their company, how many employees they have, a list of the projects that they've built, references, really anything that checks the box that, how their operations and maintenance crew functions, where they're located, how the company is capitalized, who their investors are, who their banks are. We make everybody spell that out in the RFP process.
Okay. At the end of the 20-year lease, what happens?
So there'd be 3 options that the town could exercise. One would be you can opt to terminate the agreement, have Verigy take the equipment back at their cost, move on, end of story. Option 2 would be you could extend on mutually agreeable terms for 5 years. So if there's still useful life in the equipment, if there's a commercially kind of viable way to sell that power or do something with that power, that could support an additional 5 years or even another additional 5 years from that site if both sides agree. Or if the town of Mansfield want to buy the equipment at fair market value at the end of the 20 years, you could do that as well.
Okay, so if we were to end up buying, so how much life would be left in those panels after 20 years? I mean, you're losing, it degrades over time.
Yeah,
So
you have about
after 20 years.
Yeah, you probably have about 60% useful life, although your inverters would probably be at the end of the useful life. It's difficult to say what kind of investment would be required to make the system function for a period of time that made sense. Generally speaking, I counsel people that the two options that I listed first are really the most realistic. One is that, hey, we might want to start over with a brand new project. We've already got the 3-phase infrastructure here. Great, rebid it. Whatever program exists in 20 years to help support that project, great, do that. tell Verigy to take their equipment, restore the site, and you can start fresh. The other option would be, again, I think, to do a 5-year extension if there's a reason to do that. But regardless, if you're absolutely done with solar, don't want to have another solar array here, don't want to extend with Verigy, your get out of jail free card is, hey, we're going to exercise the option for you guys to take the equipment back and restore the site.
Thank you, Adam.
Sure.
Mr. Osberger?
Yes, thank you, Adam, for the exhaustive display here. This was very good. So this may be somewhat of a circular argument, but if we're leasing it and they maintain and upgrade it, where are we with something like with a 20-year lease? And I'll give you an example. I have a relative who has an array in their backyard, and 2 years down the road, they had a branch that fell on one of the panels, and the panel that got replaced almost does the same production as the entire array. In other words, that the technology had changed so much in 3 years that it surpassed what he already had put up there. And he felt pretty silly having put the original one on there, and now here he has. But, going forward for us, 20 years down the road, you would have to imagine that some sort of technology is going to increase. And if that's the case, if we're leasing it and they're maintaining and upgraded, does that also mean that our array is going to be maintained and then upgraded as technology changes? But then if they're maintaining it, why would there be a loss of production?
Yeah, so a lot in there. Let me try to unpack. I guess I'll start with the last question first. So the natural degradation of the panel is kind of an unavoidable consequence of getting beaten by the sun for 20 years. So there's no amount of maintenance in the world that's going to prevent the panel from losing about 0.5% every year of its energy production capability. The maintenance really comes from, there's cleaning, there's just making sure that the wiring is secure. There's no, production issues. There's no panel outages. Really kind of routine things like that, which usually manifest themselves in the first year or so. And then once, you've gotten that at steady state, the equipment's going to be there about as, there's not going to be any upgrading per se of the site. There's a few reasons for that. One being that Verigy's contract with Eversource is going to be for a certain amount of power every year with some natural degradation adjusted for. So there's no incentive for Verigy to all of a sudden, 10 years down the road, replace every panel to get more energy production when their agreement with Eversource won't compensate them for that. So the economics of that for them wouldn't really make any sense. If they have to upgrade inverters at all, that really is not going to eke out much more production for them. It's just going to keep the system functioning as it should. So I don't think there's much opportunity to, out of nowhere kind of make the system bigger and then have Verigy, I don't know if the question is for them, if they would keep more of that without passing it back to the town or something like that. But generally speaking, once this investment is made, the investment's made. And then the array is going to do what it does for 20 years. And the maintenance is to keep it doing what it's supposed to be doing, not necessarily to upgrade it at all. And if maybe the other side of the question was about, advances in, panel energy production from the panels and things like that. We've seen what I would call gradual increases in wattage from panels over time. But one of the interesting things about this program is that we're per the Eversource rules, we're not allowed to build bigger than the highest consumption over the past 5 years for Mansfield. So we're really limited by a couple things here, by that rule for one, and two, just by the footprint of what this array can occupy. So I don't see I don't see much risk in doing it now versus maybe doing it later. I don't know if I'm interpreting too much into the question, but the other thing to think about too is, it's a lot of times I think people get hung up on, waiting for the perfect technology to come around that will never get any better. Not only is there, I think, a big opportunity cost in waiting, but more so than the technology, what we wait for, like if you think of us as like surfers, like waiting for the perfect wave, the wave that we want to catch is when Eversource creates programs like this. Because without a program like this, with the rules being what they are, this project doesn't get done. So I think this is really the moment, and it sounds like you guys have looked at this a few times over the last couple of years as something that you wanted to do, but maybe it just didn't happen for a variety of reasons. I really do think that with the way the incentives are structured now and the tax breaks that exist today, which are slated to actually come down over the next couple of years, and I am not really I wouldn't encourage anyone to bet on Washington doing anything crazy legislatively over the next couple of years. I mean, it could happen, it might not. So I really do think like this is the time to catch the wave on this project.
Well, I'm not really saying that we don't want to do this. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for us, and I'm certainly saying this is something we should do. But I believe I recall you saying something that, at the tail end of our 20-year lease, that the panels would only be at 60%. But then a few seconds ago, you said that some of the panels would get better over time. So I kind of got a little confused about what you meant there. So getting back to the 20-year lease thing, if our panels are going to be at 60% at the tail end, what incentive would we want to have then to buy them if they're not going to produce what we want them to?
I would say don't buy them. It's just an option. So your options are, tell Vergy to take the equipment back at their cost, start over, run another bid, do whatever you want, turn it into a disc golf, park, whatever. Or if both sides can come to terms that for an extension that makes sense for everybody, given that the system is going to be 20 years old, will likely need, X number of dollars to keep going for the next 5 or 10, then I think that would just be worked out in whatever extension the town and Vergy can come to at that time. If you can't come to an agreement over what a 5-year extension looks like in a fair way, and you don't want to buy and own the system yourself, which I personally don't recommend because it's not going to have a bunch of useful life left, and eventually you'll get stuck decommissioning the system. So I always tell people that third option, that hey, you could buy it yourself and own it and operate it, I wouldn't even bother. There's no, because you're just taking on a liability too at that point. I would say, for all intents and purposes, at the end of the 20 years, the most likely scenario is going to be you guys say to Vergy, hey, this has been great. Unless we can come to a great renewal term, for another 5 years, then the expectation is you guys are going to take your stuff and we're going to start over.
Okay.
All right. Any further questions? I have one simple question. What are we spending on electricity right now on an annual basis?
I don't have that number in front of me. I know how much you use, and I can give you a rough ballpark, but I don't have the exact budget number on hand.
Charmaine, if you're there, do you happen to know offhand, or Alan for that matter?
My figure would be rough also, but it's somewhere around 250,000, give or take.
So in terms of actual budget bottom line dollar savings for the town, what would this project produce for us?
If you did the lease, it would be about $52,000 a year. And if you did the virtual net metering, it would start in, roughly like 64,000 and then fall gradually.
So that's a net already. That's cost and current expenses.
We would still be buying, if we did the lease, we would still be buying our power just like we do now. It's just we would have that revenue, think of it as an offset. Plus we would have, I guess, the benefit of knowing that we're producing renewable energy that's getting put out in the grid.
Okay. Mr. Shagan.
Yeah, I think the way I think of it, Mayor, is if we were to incur the construction cost and build an array ourselves and not contract with Verigy on a power purchase agreement, we would net out 95% of that annual electric bill and annual electricity generation. But that would cost $4 or $5 million of cash today for us to build a system, which Verigy is offering to pay for us in exchange for us giving them most of the money from the electricity over the course of 20 years. And them in return paying us $52,000 a year to lease the land that they're going to generate power on. But from my perspective, the benefit to our being a net zero town by 2030 or whatever our charge has been to Ryan, which I think that's right, that's what it is we will be producing with this project, even though Verigy will be making most of the money off of it. We will be producing almost as much energy or almost as much electricity as we're currently using in sort of one fell swoop, and could focus the rest of our attention during and budget, frankly, during this next most of a decade to negating out our fuel expense and other sort of fossil impacts that we have as a community. I'm prepared to make the motion. I just have one question, and it's a recommendation question for Ryan. I think my understanding, Ryan, is that just to confirm, your recommendation is for us to direct you to enter into a lease agreement. That's correct? Yes. So
that's correct. I mean, we've talked about, this evening about how we could obviously meet or exceed what was projected, the lifetime value with the virtual net metering. But talking with Adam, I believe that the lease is what I would advocate for at this time.
And then my follow-up is in the financial impact portion of the AIS, there's two scenarios, one in sort of tan and one in blue. And the tan one in fine print below it says basically that this is if we covered the cost of the electricity connection, $1 million in cash from Mansfield. So my first read of this is, why would we do that if someone is willing to pay for it? But then when I look at the annual savings and the lifetime value, it seems to me that if we paid for that portion of the construction next year, we would receive in return, if we did the lease, $1.4 million roughly more than if we had Verigy front the entire cost of construction. Is that a correct understanding, that we have an offer on the table if that was not part of their construction budget, that they would instead pay us $120,500 on a lease for these services, and that would mean that we would increase our investment by 50% if we picked up that portion of construction?
The way I would look at it is, if we put $1 million up front, you're right that we would get, under the lease scenario, $2.4 million return. But of course, you have to back out that $1 million you put in. So really, what you're doing is, by putting in $1 million up front, you increase your projected lifetime value from just over $1 million to $1.4 million. So it's really a $400,000 difference. And then, of course, there's the value of money and inflation. So that's basically a 2% escalator. If you took $1 million today and you put it away, it's over 20 years at 2%, you would make $400,000. So the question is, do we have better uses of our money, or other higher priority projects that we would do better than that 2% annualized rate of return?
And your recommendation is yes, we do. So you would recommend?
I don't think it's that. I mean, I understand the $400,000. Like, if you thought of it as like money you would be handed today, that's a lot of money. That sounds like a compelling number. But when you think about over the course of 20 years, clawing that back, plus there's what you then can't do as a project or some other use of that $1 million today that you're foregoing. It's there would be some scenarios where I could see myself recommending that we put $1 million, and I just don't think that particular number equates to the right amount to do that.
Okay.
Mr. Shaken, before you make your motion, Mr. Coleman had his hand up before and I didn't see it. Mr. Coleman?
Yes, I'd like to see some comparables. What do other municipalities have? The municipalities that have farms now, what kind of production are they getting? What kind of savings? Are there any comparables that we can look at?
So this, just to be clear, this program is new for 2022. But what I can do is definitely provide references and things like that. I mean, that's not a problem. That's, part of everybody's bid responses. And, I'm personally currently working with 8 other municipalities now on municipal landfills. And we've done a whole host of rooftop projects where, again, at the end of the day, it's a panel producing energy. So whether it was done under VNM or whatever, another program, it's still kind of the same thing. And just the beauty of the lease payment is that the production, I just want to reiterate this, the production risk is entirely on Verigy. So whether it's a good year, bad year, anything in between, Mansfield still gets its lease payment. Again, just one to.
I do want to point out that we need to vote on this tonight in order to make the deadlines for the grant applications. So we're put in a kind of a box here that I'm not particularly happy about, but it is a box that has some real financial consequences if we delay the vote. So, Mr. Shaken, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion. I move effective today to authorize the town manager to enter into a 20-year lease agreement with VCP Realty doing business as Verigy, substantially consistent with the terms of the lease presented to the council relative to the construction and operation of a roughly 2.4 megawatt solar field to be physically located at the town landfill in accordance with the terms of the lease agreement as attached.
Is there a second? Ms. Berthelot seconds. Mr. Shaken, you speak to your motion?
Yeah, just briefly to reiterate, we have tasked the town manager, the sustainability committee through us has tasked the town manager with making Mansfield a net zero town by 2030. It's the beginning of 2022, and we already have a proposal at our feet to basically negate the town's entire electricity usage in one fell swoop with no financial risk to the town whatsoever. Sounds pretty good to me. I think we ought to do it, and it allows Ryan and his team to spend the next nearly 9 years tackling a much more tricky question that has to do with fuel consumption of dump trucks and snow plows and stuff like that. I don't think they make electric ones of those yet. So to the question of needing more information, I just want to point out, Adam works for us. This is a partnership that the town went out and found an expert to help us navigate this very complicated purchase situation. And so that's what Titan does. And so the bids that were put out, the response to those bids, all of the work that's gone into this proposal, while it's our first time seeing it as in its totality, is something that I think has been actually handled really well. And I'm very satisfied with the amount of due diligence and information that has gone on here. I will expect to see it again if we hit a snag. If Eversource wants $2 million to put the power in or something comes up, I hope that it will come back to us. But I think it looks really good, and I'm really looking forward to next year when we can have power generation in a really significant way happening on town land for the first time ever.
Anybody else wish to comment? Are we ready to vote? Mr. Coleman?
Yes. When was this grant known to the town of Mansfield? I mean, it seems like kind of a pressured timeline, and we seem to run into a lot of pressured timelines here in the council. I understand that, but When was this grant actually available, and how long did we actually have to get to this point?
So the program rules were just finalized in, let's see, we're in January now. Eversource was still clarifying the rules up until October. So they haven't made it easy on us from a timing perspective. And, we got the bid out in December. We're trying to hit the deadline for the one and only opportunity to submit for incentives for 2022, which requires that we have, an executed lease and all of our interconnection documentation together by the last week of February. And we only have one opportunity to submit for 2022. So, that's, in a perfect world, it would be a rolling application. We'd have more flexibility there, but, Eversource and the state set the rules. We just do our best to play by them. The last point I'll just reiterate, because I think it's really important. And as the consultant for the town, these are just perspectives I think I can bring that the average person just might not have, just because you don't have as much familiarity with the program as I might. There is very, very real risk that in 2023 and thereafter, because I've seen this happen before, it happens every year. The first year of the program is always undersubscribed because there's just not as much activity in the market yet. So when we're competing over a finite pool of money, and we're one of the first movers with a tried and true product, solar, and a infrastructure that's really been supported by Eversource for 10 years, that's the period you want to be applying. You don't want to be applying in 2023 or 2024 when you have so much pipeline of activity ready to go for that next year and all trying to claw each other's eyes out for money. What that means at the end of the day is your 15-cent bid in price is going to need to be 14 next year or 13 the year after. It's not a pressure tactic. I assure you, it's just coming from doing this for 10 years and seeing how each successive year in the program goes. It just gets more competitive each time. So if you have the ability to get into the auction, the incentive auction for 2022, I highly recommend you do it, because the project, if with a lower incentive, is just going to be less valuable to town next year.
Mr. Osberger.
I'm just going to throw this out there, and not to be a wrench in the works, but we do meet one more time before the 28th on the 14th.
But the deadline is February 1st.
Oh, I thought I read that the deadline was the February 28th.
Well, that's for all the signed documents. That's not our deadline. Mr. Shaken.
I have every confidence that if between today and our first meeting in February, or our second meeting in February, there's issues that will cause things to change substantially from the lease as it's been presented to us, that we will hear about it again, and we'll hear about it when a final agreement is reached as well. And again, if there's any changes, we'll vote on them that are going to change the bottom line for the town or for the project.
All right, are we ready to vote? Is there anybody on the council who wishes to abstain from this vote? Is there anybody on the council who wishes to vote in the negative? Then I rule this motion has been adopted unanimously. You got your solar field. I have a quick question. Is this like what Lebanon did on Route 32? There's this huge field of solar panels on Route 32.
I think that's a privately held array under a program from a couple of years ago. Is it like near the old mushroom farm?
Yes.
Yep.
Across the road.
Right. That's similar but a lot bigger. That's like a 6 megawatt array, I think 6 or 8. So substantially bigger.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
Adam,
very
I just
much
want to let
for
you
all
know,
your
guys.
hard work, and thank you to the staff for doing this and for putting this together with such short notice.
Okay. No problem. Thanks. Nice to meet everybody. And perhaps I will see you in a coming meeting.
In a way, I hope not, but yes.
Well, yeah, we'll keep things on track. But
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. All right, next on our agenda is staffing for adequate fire and emergency response. And I do want to remind you that it's now 10 minutes of 10, and we also have a Parks and Rec presentation. In fact, Mr. Aylesworth, I am wondering, would it be a problem to postpone the Parks and Rec, because I don't think we'll get to them until 10:30.
I guess I don't know what the staff's desire is. You know, it's obviously unfortunate the time they've committed this evening to come up empty, but you know, I guess that's the prerogative of the council, and I don't know. I think probably staff would prefer to have the council make that decision.
Let me ask the members of the council, what is your feeling on postponing this item, the Parks and Rec update? We are not being asked to take an action on it. Is there anybody objects to our tabling or postponing the Parks and Rec? All right, I'm going to apologize to Parks and Rec folks who have hung in for so long, but I don't think any of us really want to be talking about this when we're all exhausted. All right, so let's move to the Fire and Emergency Response Safer Grant application. Mr. Aylesworth.
Yep, we have Fire Chief and some other folks from the fire department here to talk about the grant application. Their presentation will go into more details, but suffice it to say, the intent of this grant, which is a FEMA grant, federal money, is the broad aims are to provide adequate funding to enable fire departments, municipal fire departments across the country to adhere to industry best practices and standards as promulgated by outfits like NFPA. And so this would be a request to add staffing that would be covered, the salary and benefits of the staffing, of which there would be one individual for each of the fire department's current 4 shifts. So 4 full-time firefighter EMTs would be fully funded for the first 3 years. And then the town would be responsible for picking up the salary and fringe benefits for those individuals for a minimum of 2 years after the grant period. So it's basically a 5-year commitment, with the first 3 years being funded by the grant. So without any further ado, let me turn over to Chief Mitchell so he can introduce other members of his team that are here.
Thank you, Mr. Aylesworth, and good evening to the council. I'm also introduce with me tonight Firefighter Dave Kopleski. He's going to be running the program as far as the slideshow, and Captain Ori Lavitt, who's been with the department for 30 years. And Captain Lavitt's our GIS expert, and as you reviewed the presentation, there are mapping, and he's going to explain all the mapping. So if we could get started, Dave, with the presentation. Okay, screen number 2. Okay, the background is, career staffing was implemented in the 60s and the reason behind it was be able to get the apparatus to the scene. The volunteers would arrive. So the fire truck gets there on scene, help comes, they take care of mitigate the emergency incident. Nationwide, volunteer numbers are down by 25%. This is not a Mansfield problem. This is a nationwide problem. It's nationwide, seeing the calls for service are tripling. The commitment, there's a big commitment to being part of the fire department on a volunteer level. If you look at the numbers, back in 2009, we had 22 qualified volunteer firefighters, and those qualified firefighters could enter structural fires inside a building to pumping up, using the trucks to pump at fires. They basically were trained to the level of our career firefighters. And they were responding to 1,800 calls approximately back in 2009. And the staffing has been basically about 4 since 1968. Today, we only have 5 qualified volunteers, and 2 of them are chief officers. And in 2021, the MFD responded to 2,336 calls for service. Well, you can see there's definitely been an increase since 2009. Go ahead, Dave. Station 207 was single staffing. That's where the captain ran out of up until 2020. And between 2002 and 2020, there was 2 separate medical emergencies with staff. One member had passed. The other member was having a medical emergency, and that member was out of work for approximately 1 year and has come back to work and is healthy and working on the line today. 2002, NIOSH recommended that we staff fire stations to ensure adequate emergency responses, capabilities for communities, and safety of personnel. And that was based off of the report that was done after the line of duty death of 2002. Good. Mutual aid, when unavailable, we all rely on each other. We all have automatic aid agreements in place. But our mutual aid partners that surround us, Willimantic and Yukon are the only career staff departments and respond to more calls for service in Mansfield. Columbia, Ashford, Wellington, they are volunteer departments. Ashford uses a per diem model for daytime staffing. Tallinn, we also use, it's not listed. They use daytime career staffing, but basically they're relying on volunteers to come at night. You can see our mutual aid data for just EMS calls alone from years 2018 to 2021. So, doing anywhere between 150, 130 on the low side to 196 on the high side. So you cut the difference about 150 or 60 a year that we're relying on mutual aid for EMS responses. And I can tell you the last 2 Tuesdays, January 11th, we had 4 calls going at once, and we were relying on mutual aid ambulances, and it got to the point where they were assigning one of our ambulances to a call they hadn't even finished the one they were on. And then the following Tuesday, on the 18th, we were 3 deep on 2 different occasions within a 6-hour period. So we're definitely getting busier, no question about it. Go ahead, Dave. The need for staffing. These numbers here are, if you look at 2009, there was 22, as I said earlier, 22 qualified volunteers. The total related volunteer responses was 319 out of 1,765 calls, but a little over 1,000 was EMS related. Fire runs were 755. So the total qualified volunteers, and again, volunteers being able to train to the same level as our career staff, was not even 1. It was 0.42. A little bit better in 2013, but again, the numbers went up a little bit and they've drastically dropped in 2021. And as you can see, our numbers have increased. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Captain Lavitt. Captain Lavitt's going to talk about the OSHA requirement of 2 in, 2 out regulations. And also he's going to talk about and explain the maps. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Try to be quick for the sake of fatigue here. The chief asked me to speak of 2 deployment considerations that are critical to the successful grant application, and that is staffing for 2 in and 2 out and response time. When we speak of staffing, what do we mean by staffing? And generally, staffing is dictated by the type of resources that's being requested or deployed. Example, an ambulance, a service vehicle, a tanker, mini pumper, for example, may need a team of 2. But a company level staffing response is required for an engine and that's first due to on a fire scene. Well, why is that? Well, you've got various industry standards, namely NFPA 1500, and which is the Fire Department Safety and Health and Wellness Program, NFPA 1710 for career deployment of resources, and 1724 volunteer and combination deployment of resources that have dictated the 2 in 2 out rule. And in 1998, that rule was codified by OSHA in at least 5 of their regulations. So the 2 in 2 out is now law. And essentially what the key components are is that firefighters in a hazardous area operate in teams of 2 or more, and that a team of 2 or more is present outside the hazardous area to facilitate rescue. And that personnel are organized into companies and operating with one piece of apparatus managed by a company officer. And the minimum staffing for that company is for 4 firefighters. Some of the regulations where you can find this, where it's been codified is 1910-120 hazardous materials, 1910-134 respiratory protection, and 1910-154, 155, and 156 for fire brigades. Even without these regulations, or regardless of the SAFER grant, this is something that we're going to have to tackle in the vision of this fire department in the future, regardless if we get the grant or not. And it's critical that we do so because of the decline in volunteerism that the chief spoke of. I like to paraphrase ICMA when in their book, Managing Fire and Rescue Services, where they say it is axiomatic that there must be enough staff to put apparatus into effective use. 1 firefighter is required to operate a pump, 2 firefighters are required to deploy a single hand line, and you need to have a company officer to direct the company. Therefore, a minimum of 4 firefighters is required to put an engine company into effective use. Fire trucks are expensive. We got to be able to staff them, or we can't put them into effective use, period. The second critical component is, can get to the next slide, Dave, is in reference to response time. What do we mean by response time? Well, the standard that we are seeking to achieve at this point is 1720. That's for the volunteer and combination departments. It's a starting point. And they define response time as your turnout time plus your travel time. So when we look at response time, why is this important? And it's important for everything from, staffing levels to determining locations of future firehouses. We look at geographic response times, where we can get to anywhere by road in town, response times to specific target hazards. And the third thing that we look at that's important that you don't see in the standards because it's specific to each town is an equitable response time to the residents. In Mansfield, that's particularly important because in the Donahue study in 2002, she cautioned Mansfield that because we chose not to have separate taxing districts, it's important for us to distribute our resources in an equitable way to the residents in town. So when we speak of response time, and we're looking at this slide, 6-minute arrival time. What that means is it's 90-second turnout time. So we get the time of call, we can hear the dispatch, we get in the fire truck within 90 seconds. And this indicates 4.5 minutes down the road of a travel time. So it's a total of what we can accomplish in 6 minutes. If you look on the left with our current staffing, it takes us a response from 2 firehouses at Station 107 and Station 307 to achieve 4 firefighters. So we can provide 4 firefighters and meet the 2 in and 2 out requirement within 6 minutes in the area in the green. It's roughly 3.51% of town. With the proposed staffing, we will only need to, for the initial engine response, we would increase the staffing in station 307 to 4. So we can achieve approximately it'll go to about 20.64% of town in a 6-minute arrival time. Mainly because you're deploying with one firehouse for the engine company, and that firehouse is located in the geographic center of town. So, not to mention, you're capitalizing on an equitable distribution of resources. Next slide, please. With an 8-minute arrival time, you can see with the current staffing level, the overlap between 1s and 3s, because again, it takes 2 stations to respond together in order to achieve our 4. The overlap is about 23.18% of town. With the proposed staffing, it'll jump to 42.18% of town. Next slide. 10-minute arrival time, going from 49% or close to 50% to nearly 75%. So you can see how it increases as the arrival time increases. And next slide, Dave. With 14% of town, the current staffing is about 82.5% of town within 14 minutes. With the proposed staffing, it's actually 100% of town. It's not an anomaly. What it is a lot of times with the ArcGIS, what our vendors have told us in the past is that it nets out for some larger bodies of water, and I'm suspect that it did that for Mansfield Hollow, or a portion of it. So that sums up really the response time portion of it. The other thing that the SAFER grant in particular is looking for in terms of response time is to different types of classifications in town. Next town, they talk of suburban areas, and they have a 10-minute requirement for that you should achieve 90% of the time. We will not have an impact with that. It'll be the same, because our suburban area, according to the census website that I was referred to by the town planner's office, is in the northwest corner of town. We can currently staff to 97% within 10 minutes, and it would not change operating from station 307 at all. Next slide, Dave. For 14 minutes response time for suburban and rural area, again, it brings us back to the 82 with the current level of staffing, and with 96, which is actually 100% for the proposed staffing, plus an equitable distribution of resources to the residents. Next slide, Dave. The last slide is a optional response area that the standard allows you to create, which is a special risk response area. What I did was, working with the town's conservation and development plan, determined which areas in town were zoned for commercial, business, high density residential, and showed you currently, it's not as easy to see this, but currently with the on the left-hand map, the items in the green, we can respond to in 10 minutes. Currently with current level of staffing. With the proposed level of staffing, that's about 23.3% of the special risk response area. And the proposed staffing, we would be upwards of 88%, close to 89%. With all the development that's going on in the north end of town, it's sometimes easy to forget that in 1969, the first station that was supposed to be built it was supposed to be a southern station. And many reports and studies indicated that afterwards. We are already there at that level of development in the southern end of town, and we have been for some time. But you can see the the difference between what one firefighter per group will give you in terms of deployment of an engine company. Unless there are any specific questions on the maps, I'll give it back to the chief.
Any questions on the maps from anybody? Mr. Osberger, followed by Mr. Shuren.
How much mutual aid do you get from UConn that helps with your coverage?
I think this,
if any.
I think the chief spoke to the mutual aid, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we get a. Do you want to speak to that, Chief?
we get a fair amount from UConn, and we also provide mutual aid to UConn as well.
I would say it's probably somewhat proportional for medical emergencies. That is for an ambulance response. For a fire response, it's probably a little less, just off the cuff, a little disproportionate. We don't respond to UConn for nearly as many fires. For obvious, yeah, UConn would respond to Mansfield on pretty much any structure fire assignment. They'd be on the first alarm response.
Thank you.
Mr. Shuren, followed by Mr. Shaken.
Just so I understand, if you were taking the UConn, for example, and you somehow integrating that into our overall data, have you looked at arrival time there? Your arrival time calculations are based entirely on Mansfield alone responding. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. So what is the question, sir?
Well, if you were to integrate our partners, those that we collaborate with, if you include that, what would the average time be as of now, arrival time?
I did not map the UConn Fire Department out because we're talking about a geographic response within 6 minutes.
Yeah.
If you were to include UConn, they respond as an engine company, so they would meet the requirement. What the effort here is to show is that the SAFER grant requires that the first due apparatus is staffed with appropriate levels of staffing and can show a significant improvement in response time. And that's what we've shown here.
Thank you.
Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. I know the Fitch and Associates study is referred to on this next slide, which we haven't gone over yet, but this is sort of map specific question. If I am understanding it correctly, we have for the last 20 years or more only staffed the station in the north side of town with 207. Is that the correct number? Minimally with one person, and they sort of respond next to people if there's calls that need to be responded to. And this proposal would not change the staffing in that station at all. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so, number one, we would still be out of compliance with the NEOSH findings that the chief mentioned earlier, I think. But then number two, if the council, one of the things that Fitch and Associates talked about was, do we need 3 stations? And if we got rid of some of them, since there are some aging buildings, where would we relocate? Would the maps change at all or significantly if we adopted this staffing model and then consolidated our operations into 2 stations or 1 station that was centrally located and theoretically closed 207?
Yeah, Mr. Shaken, we're looking at that right now. We're going to be doing some map work where we look at kind of like just playing with different scenarios to see where the stations would best be located. That with the town going through the exercise of evaluating all of the town facilities, that's what we're going to be looking at as well. And the reason why the captain was pulled out of Station 207 was for safety purposes. In running one person on piece of fire apparatus, any fire apparatus, is not a best practice, and it's not safe, because that one person's going to get there and they're going to do basically minimal until the help arrives.
Just one quick clarification to Mr. Shankin. I don't believe we would be in violation of the NIOSH recommendations based on moving the captain down to Station 307, which is where he is now. Also, one more point of clarification. It wasn't just Station 207 that was staffed with one firefighter. It was Station 107 that was staffed with one firefighter as well for those years.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Mr. Asperger?
We're going to be, or there's someone's going to be building a fairly large apartment complex right across the street from 207.
Yep.
And we're considering closing that station.
No, we're looking at all our options, Mr. Osberger. Yeah, you're right. It's 392 apartments and 15,000 square feet of retail commercial space going across there. I know the Fitch and Associates recommends a station to the west of the Four Corners, and eliminating not only Station 207, but also Station 107. And we'll look at that, and we'll look at other scenarios as well based on response times and mapping the geographics of the town.
Would those changes affect staffing levels, or what would the impact be?
Well, I don't think it's going to affect the staffing levels. It's just going to consolidate more so than anything. You know, before I got here, the decision was made after the medical emergency to one of our members. My predecessor made the decision that we're going to pull the captain out of there and we're going to put him at Station 307, which is 999 Stores Road, and run him out of there. So nobody's working alone anymore. And that was the thought process behind it.
Okay. Further questions? Mr. Katzenberger?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. A couple questions. One, to pick up on Ron's point.
Sure.
I'm not clear on what the role, how UConn's response affects the arrival time. Is the arrival time that's listed currently and with currently, is that not include UConn? So if UConn gets there first?
We evaluated our response. We didn't include UConn, and the reason being is the University of Connecticut, just on the Stores campus alone, does approximately 3,000 runs a year. You know, we have mutual aid agreements with them. They roll into our town. We roll onto the campus. So at times, they may not be available.
Sure, I don't know. I understand that. But if, for example, if a Yukon truck does arrive,
yep,
that's, before a town truck does, that's not, that arrival time is not calculated as when the Yukon truck arrives.
No, we for our grant purposes, we did, and to propose applying for the SAFE grant, we did not factor that in, because we're actually looking for the staffing for the Mansfield Fire Department.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why we didn't factor that in.
Okay. Does the response times of these fire or fire and medical emergency, because the staffing needs would vary, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are basically fire and EMS. And when we talk about the 2 in, 2 out, that's for any type of emergency call for service that requires an immediate life danger atmosphere. So anytime you send somebody into an IDLH, you're supposed to have a backup team.
I'm sorry, what's an IDLH?
Immediately dangerous to life and health.
Immediate dangerous life and health. That's
Okay.
what that acronym.
was someone who was like a heart attack, or there was a
Yeah,
clear medical
well,
emergency.
Yeah, medical emergency, we would still need required, besides two members on the ambulance, to have additional help on scene. Because
Okay.
when you start getting into cardiac emergencies or any type of trauma, you definitely need more hands.
Okay, no, thank you. My last question is just, so I thought I saw it in the slides, but I couldn't see it again. The current staffing is 5-4, is that correct?
Yeah, we run a 5-4 model. We staff with 5, but we can drop to 4. But also keep in mind the 5-4 model. When we run with 5, we have a captain and 4 firefighter EMTs. So we're able to staff the 2 ambulances. When those 2 ambulances go out, we have 1 person available to respond, and that's the shift captain. When we drop to 4, we lose an ambulance because the captain doesn't leave the town, and he'll have somebody with him, but you're running 1 ambulance, and then you're going to be relying on mutual aid.
Was the 5-4? I mean, I think this is well before you came, but I think that was presented. I think it was presented to us a number of years ago as a solution to an earlier staffing problem.
Yep.
I may be incorrect in that, but that's how I recall.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah, that was proposed and presented to the town council back, Chief Dagan.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
It's my recollection over the 10 years that I've been on the council that there has been a continuing loss of volunteer firefighters. And every year we've had to try to fill in a gap. And of course, this has been true for 20, 30 years. You know, it's a national problem, and it's compounded by the fact that people no longer work in their hometown, and that both partners in a marriage are currently employed in could be in different places. It's just harder and harder to find the kinds of commitment that is absolutely necessary to be a volunteer firefighter. Mr. Osberger.
There's a motion. I could put it on. Sure,
go ahead.
I'll go ahead, Mr. Osberger. I was going to finish up the slideshow.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was.
No, I just got a few more slides that I can go through very quickly if nobody else has any more questions. Basically, the benefits of what we're proposing, the benefits is we'll be able to, with a 4-person crew, it's found to be 30% more effective on the fire ground than a two-person crew, and that includes fire suppression and occupant rescue. Our proposed staffing model provides an efficient initial response from a centralized location, which will improve equitability resources. Captain Lavitt touched on that. And the Fitch Associates study recommends a minimum of 6 personnel on duty. The department invests in at least 1 additional person. We go from a 5-4 model to a 6-5 model. This would be able to increase our responses to simultaneous calls, which we're doing about 30% of the time right now. Next slide. And here's the estimated cost. And again, just keep in mind, these are estimates. The first 3 years, if we were successful getting the grant award, year 1, we get a portion of the award to cover the salaries of the 4 and just benefits. The approximate town share would be about $48,000. That includes training, protective clothing, uniforms, because they would be going to the State Fire Academy. Year 2, and also additional training. Year 2 would be the second portion for the year for salary and benefits, and approximately about $30,000 continue additional training because we have a professional development criteria that we send our people through, and that would cover a lot of that. Year 3 would be the final payment, approximate cost. And as you can see, years 4 and 5, the town would absorb the cost, and the approximate cost would be around $580,000 to $585,000. And keep in mind that the SAFER grant for this year is $560 million available by the federal government. That was an increase of approximately $200 million. So it's a very competitive process, but we've got a shot. And as it said, as you can see, you know, additional costs for training gear, uniforms. We're looking at probably approximately $1.4 million broken down over 3 years. And the award would cover the salary and benefits as I talked about. So next.
Can I ask a question on that slide?
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
How many firefighters are you proposing hiring under this grant?
4.
4. Okay, so that makes the $580,000 make more sense.
Yep.
4 new firefighters. Okay.
Yep. And SAFER grant proposal is due to be submitted February. It's actually February 4th. I apologize for that. Funding of full-timers. And I put in for, I haven't, when I submitted my budget approval, because the SAFER grant's not guaranteed, I submitted for funding for additional full-time firefighters. Next slide. Okay, and that's the end.
Any further questions for Chief Mitchell? Mr. Osberger, I think it's your turn.
Mr. Osberger. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Mitchell, are you sure?
Yeah.
All right, I move effective January 24th, 2022, to authorize the town manager to submit a grant further funding application under the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, Staffing for Adequate Fire Emergency Response, or SAFER, grant program.
Berthelot seconds. Mr. Osberger, do you wish to speak to your motion?
I would. I think this is a viable thing. Our firefighters in town do a wonderful job. I know that when they've come to my mother's house to help her or take her to the hospital, they've always been professional. And I know most of the guys anyway, and they do a good job.
Anybody else wish to speak to this? Mr. Shaken.
Yeah, I'm going to support this. I think it's where we've all been heading. I just want to sort of register my sort of discomfort and frustration that this is one of a series of times that we've recently been asked to support a significant cost expenditure in out years of a grant application, and the application is due in a week. And if we say no, we lose out on millions of dollars in state and federal funding. The last time was the purchase of the Quint piece of apparatus. And as Brian said earlier, this is something that happens from time to time on the council, and it is what it is. And it's sort of part of how the world works in terms of this. We've talked a lot in my 6 years here, 5 years here, about the future of the fire department across, I think 3 chiefs have been here since I joined, and this has been a constant theme, but we've never actually sat down and deliberated and set a direction. And from my perspective, the way we ought to go about applying for this funding or other sources of funding and setting the direction for the department is to make that decision first and then go after the money second rather than backwards. So I'm not one to pass up $1.5 million in federal money to hire firefighters that we've been told by 3 chiefs we need, but I am just a little frustrated that we are not given them much of a choice in these matters often. And I want to do that work. I know it's underway around the firehouse locations specifically so that we can sort of set a strategic direction for the department and work towards getting there, whether that's means we're good at the 6-5 model and that's where we want to be, or into the future, or we need more and we have a path to get there. When I joined the council, there was a long-term plan to add a firefighter a year over a period of time. And we got there and we're now beyond there. And so that's my perspective on this application. I'll be supporting it though.
Mr. Aylesworth?
Mr. Shaken's comments are well taken. I just wanted to, I guess, touch on a couple of related things. So part of, I guess, and I appreciate and hear what you're saying about, the timing with some of these grant applications and the tight turnaround. And, feeling, frankly, like our collective backs might be against the wall to get things, get the proverbial trigger pulled in time. In this particular case, I'll raise my hand and say perhaps my own guidance to the fire chief, hearing your comments may have been askew, but you'll recall we applied for this grant last year. I'm not sure if the town previously applied for it, but applied last year, and the council supported it. Basically the same amount of funding for 4 additional firefighters. And so given that the composition of the council hasn't changed, well, with the exception of Mr. Coleman's addition, replacing Mr. Freudman, my sense was that the council would again support this, call it first step in the staffing plan, this 6-5 model, recognizing wholly what you said, and this is the conversations that we're having, very much at a staff level right now about the long-term staffing needs of the department, because you'll recall that the Fitch report calls for, frankly, personnel growth and expansion beyond the 6-5 model. But this was, it seemed to me, at least going back to last year and then fast forwarding this year, that first step was, it seemed to be well received and supported by the council, recognizing that any additional discussion about further staffing increases or changes and how many stations we're talking about operating, those are all things that are basically being evaluated and studied right now simultaneously.
I just want to make sure that the council members understand that this is a $500,000 increase 3 years out, so, or in the 4th year. So it's a very substantial increase in cost as we go forward. Mr. Coleman.
Yes, I just want to speak to the motion. I support this motion. Always had a great experience here with the fire department. I think it's real important that we get the response times down, and the maps, show that. I support this 100%, especially now that we're getting so many more housing units here in town. We're going to need, I think we're going to need more staffing there. As far as the $500,000 rate increase, I would hope that we would use some of the property tax from the new apartment complexes that are going.
I do think that there are some additional revenue sources. I would be, if I didn't think there were additional funds coming to the town from a couple of sources, I would have been much more hesitant to recommend this very significant expansion of costs as we go down the road. All right, are we ready to vote? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from this vote? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the negative? Then I declare that we have adopted this grant proposal and this motion unanimously. Good luck. I hope we get it this time.
Mayor, thank you. If before you move on, if I just may just say just a couple of things. First, I would like to thank the council for your support for us moving forward. Very appreciative on behalf of the members of the fire department. And also, anytime I am available, if any council member would like to sit and talk about the future of the fire department, I'm working with Mr. Aylesworth. We're hoping down the road, and I would like to do this. I've conveyed this to Mr. Aylesworth to present a vision for the future of the fire department, but I'd like to do it in person. I think it would be more beneficial to be able to do it in front of the council when we get to that point where the council starts meeting in person. So, but again, thank you all, and I'll let you get back to your business. Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much for hanging in with us.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
And Captain.
Okay, now we're on to reports of council committees. Does personnel have a report?
Yes, we met prior to this meeting. We had a discussion of some COVID issues that was basically replicated in the full council. We also discussed at the council's mandate to us the rules of procedure. We had a kind of vigorous discussion. One item that we did approve unanimously as a recommendation, and I suppose it will be in the form of a motion, in order to conform to existing practice, to delete language that says on Rule 3F, recurring old business items shall have an end date to be determined by the council. So I would move that this be a change to our rules of procedure. And I would point out that we could specifically determine an end date on a specific item, but this language implies that there should always be an end date, and that has not been our practice. So I'd like our practice to conform to the rules of procedure.
Do you need a second, or is this the committee recommendation?
It's a committee recommendation.
All right. Does anybody have any objections to Mr. Shaken?
Just where was, Ron, could you say where the rule was again?
Yeah, that is Rule 3F, which on the rules of procedure is page 3.
And can you restate the motion?
Yeah, to delete language that indicates that recurring old business items shall have an end date to be determined by the council.
Thank you.
Does anybody object to this motion? Hearing none, I declare the motion has been adopted unanimously. Anything else from personnel?
No, not at this time.
Finance.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We met last week, a special meeting, as we couldn't meet normal time. I won't go into, we did hear, as noted, the solar project proposal, as well as we went into the budget and salary transfers. The other two items that were not otherwise on the table tonight that we discussed. One was, while it's not, we did not need to vote on it, we agreed with the need to extend the contract for the auditor of record for an additional year. And the finance director made some excellent points about the merits of the need to do so. And again, there's no motion that we needed to vote on there or to bring to the council, other than to let you know that we agreed that those reasons were compelling. The second area are the strategies for improving the Mansfield Community Center's membership. That much of that would have been discussed today. We did go into some detail, and I'm very happy to report that the new permanent director, Jay O'Keefe, provided some excellent information. The one thing I'll add to that is we talked at some length, as we have for a while now, about the feasibility or advisability of eliminating or reducing reliance on the Silver Sneaker program. That's a longer discussion than we'll certainly have now, and one that should be at least initially led by the MCC staff, Parks and Recreation staff. But we did agree informally that it makes sense not to make a major decision like that when there is so much uncertainty about membership as well as programs due to COVID. Now that, of course, is a full council decision. There was no motion made either way, but that was I think the sense of the committee and the Parks and Recreation, that this information is very important. The data they collected and are collecting will be very useful in trying to determine what we should do, but that it was premature at this point to make a recommendation to the council as a whole to change the current reliance on, or to change the acceptance of Silver Sneakers, although there were very specific proposals that no doubt Jay will go into at the next town council meeting that they are implementing or will implement to increase membership. Thank you.
Mr. Shuren, did I see your hand?
My apologies due to the late hour. There was another measure that the Personnel Committee approved unanimously that I would present as a motion to change the name of the Personnel Committee to the Personnel and Procedures Committee.
Is this, I meant to check on this. Is this a charter?
It's a question, and I did ask that.
Yeah, I can confirm with, well, actually, maybe Sarah Ann would know as well, but I don't believe there's any reference in our charter to any of the standing committees, enumerating a name, authorities, or anything else. So I don't think it becomes a charter revision or compliance issue.
All right. Is it an ordinance on committees?
I don't know the answer to that.
Can I recommend,
We wait until next meeting to.
yes, please, can
Yeah, okay.
withdraw your motion and let's
Okay,
do
I
some
will withdraw the
checking?
motion.
Because I have the recollection of having seen it somewhere other than our rules.
Okay, I will withdraw the motion.
Okay, Committee on Committees.
Thanks, Tony. So the big news for Committee on Committees isn't from the Committee on Committees, but from the Mansfield Ethics Board. They had a meeting where they came up with a recommendation finding that due to a possible conflict or perceived conflict, that people who are associated with organizations that might get money from the Affordable Housing Trust should not be appointed to the Affordable Housing Committee. I've invited Attorney Deneen to meet with us at our next Committee on Committees meeting to sort of think this through, because it has much larger ramifications when we think about people who are on our other committees, who are responsible for advocating for money going to organizations that they're part of as well. None of these folks, of course, getting any personal enrichment, just happen to be experts in various areas. So I think that'll be an ongoing conversation.
Thank you. There's nothing from the Affordable Housing Committee that I'm aware of. Is that correct?
It doesn't exist yet. I mean, it exists in theory, but it has not been populated.
Okay. Reports of council committees. We've done departmental and advisory committee reports. Anything on petitions, requests, and communications? Anything for future agendas? The next item on Mr. Shaken.
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second? I've got seconds all over the place. I'm going to let Mr. Kotchenberger second. He hasn't seconded tonight, I don't think. All right. Is there anybody who wishes to remain? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much for hanging in.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Watch for the doodle on our
Recording
special meeting.
stopped.
Tomorrow.
Good night.